Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. Have you ever been alone and still felt watched? Have you ever heard something at night? A sound so subtle, so precise, that you couldn't explain it, no matter how many times you tried. This is a story about silence, about memory, and a knock that never came from the outside. It began on a quiet night in a small apartment, just one man living alone, no visitors, no noise, no reason to be afraid, until just after midnight, the knocking started, from the closet. 3 knocks, every night, same time, and then one night the door opened, but not the closet door, a door behind it, one that had never been there before. A door that wasn't locked from his side. What he found beyond it wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster. It was something far more haunting. A place where lost memories lived, and the past refused to stay buried. This isn't just a story about strange sounds in the dark. It's about the things we lock away, and what happens when they finally knock back. This is The Knocking Is Coming From My Closet, But I Live Alone. It started 3 nights ago. Quiet at first. So soft that it could have been mistaken for anything. A creak in the walls, an old pipe groaning in the night. But it wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a pulse, 3 distinct knocks, all evenly spaced, all too deliberate to ignore. That first night, he sat up in bed and stared at the closet for nearly 20 minutes. Listening to the silence that followed. His mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe the building was just settling. Maybe someone upstairs had dropped something. Maybe it was all just in his head. He turned the lamp back off and lay down. But sleep didn't come easy. And when it did, it was light and twitchy, filled with images of doors slightly ajar and shadows with no source. The second night, the knocking came again. Same time, 12:41 a.m. Not a second before, not a second after. The sound pulled him from sleep, like an alarm. It was louder this time, or maybe his awareness was sharper. He froze again, heartbeat louder than the knocks themselves. Still 3, always 3. He didn't move, he didn't speak. He just lay there, eyes wide, ears tuned to the quiet aftermath. But there was no follow-up, no whisper, no scratching, just stillness. When morning came, he forced himself to check the closet. The door creaked open on hinges that felt colder than usual. Inside, nothing, just coats, jackets, and a single box of old shoes. No sign that anything had moved, or that anything or anyone had been there. But the sense of being watched didn't leave. It hung in the air like breath in winter. The third night, he didn't sleep. He waited. Something deep inside him had shifted from fear to obsession. He sat upright in bed, phone in hand, watching the closet door as though it might blink. And at 12:41, the sound came again. 3 sharp knocks, one after the other. This time, his legs moved before his thoughts caught up. He stepped out of bed and walked slowly toward the closet, every part of him tense and trembling. He reached for the doorknob. It was warm, too warm. The kind of warmth that doesn't come from air vents or forgotten light bulbs. It was the kind of warmth that suggests presence. He opened it, slowly. Clothes shifted gently. as if a breeze had passed through. But again, there was nothing, no sign of intrusion, no hidden door, just the lingering sense that something had changed and that something was waiting. During the day, everything felt normal, mundane, familiar. He cooked, cleaned, even scrolled through his phone like it all hadn't happened. But when night returned, dread came with it. He didn't want to be afraid of his own closet. That was something kids did. And yet, when the clock hit 12:40, he felt the tension build like static in the air. Then, 12:41. Knock, knock. He didn't move this time. Didn't even open his eyes. He just listened. And then, something different happened. After the knocks, there was breathing, faint, rhythmic, almost synchronized with his own. He sat up slowly, the hairs on his arms standing on end. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it was undeniably there. Something was on the other side of that door, and it was alive. That was the night. He realized this wasn't just a sound. It was a message, or worse, an invitation, because the knocking didn't feel random anymore. It felt personal, like someone or something knew he was there, knew he was listening, and wanted to be heard. He considered calling someone, but what would he even say? There's knocking coming from my closet. Who would believe that? He didn't believe it himself, not really, but deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't just a haunting. It wasn't a prank, or a pipe, or a dream. This was something much older, much closer, and it had found a way in. The fifth night came with an unexpected calm. No knocking, no sound at all, just silence. And for the first time in nearly a week, it felt disappointing. He had been bracing for it, watching the digital clock on his nightstand tick down to 12:41, like it was counting towards some terrible birthday. But when the numbers changed and the knock never came, he felt his chest sink in a strange mix of relief and confusion. He stayed up for another hour, eyes glued to the closet, ears straining for any hint of presence. Nothing. When he finally drifted off, it was with that same strange feeling, the way a person feels when the pain they've grown used to suddenly disappears, like something had been taken from him. And that's when he realized he was starting to expect it, and maybe even need it. The next day, he avoided the closet altogether, not out of fear, but out of defiance, as if not looking at it would make it less real. He made breakfast slowly, toast, eggs, coffee, just like any other morning. He even laughed at a video on his phone, but there was a hollowness in the air, a weight that hadn't lifted just because the knocking had stopped. The whole apartment felt like it was waiting for something to resume. It was quiet, but not peacefully so. It was the kind of silence that hangs just before something breaks. He found himself staring at his phone's clock throughout the day, checking the time like he was counting down again. As night approached, he felt the pull of it stronger than ever, like the clock and the closet were working together, like they knew he was still listening, even if he didn't admit it out loud. At 12:41 a.m. that night, the knocking came back, but it was different this time. Softer, slower, as if testing him. 3 knocks again, but spaced out, each one with an eerie pause between. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. Instead, he just whispered into the dark, "What do you want?" He hadn't planned to speak. The words came out on their own, like something inside him had finally cracked. The moment he said it, the room felt colder, denser. The closet didn't answer, but in the silence that followed, he heard something slide, a scrape, like wood against wood, and then something even more disturbing. A creak, like a door easing open from within. His closet door was still shut. He could see it clearly, but behind it, something else had moved. He stood, carefully, not brave, just exhausted. He crossed the room, bare feet pressing into the cold floorboards with every step. He reached for the knob, this time not hesitating. He turned it, opened it slowly, and there past his jackets behind the old shoeboxes was a faint yellowish glow, the kind of glow you might see under a closed door in a hallway. Except this was inside his closet, where no door had ever been. His breath caught in his chest. He pushed the clothes aside, heart pounding so loudly, he thought it might drown out the sound of his own thoughts. And there it was, a wooden door, faded, with an old brass knob and chipped white paint. It looked familiar, but impossible. It hadn't been there before. It couldn't have been. Yet there it stood, and somehow the knob was already turned slightly, as if someone had just walked through it. He didn't open it. Not that night. He closed the closet again and stepped back, his heart refusing to settle. Sleep didn't come, not even a trace. He just sat in his bed, staring at the door, wondering if it had always been there, and he had somehow missed it. He had moved into this apartment 2 years ago. There was nothing behind those clothes but drywall. Still, the image of that door burned into his memory. It wasn't just its sudden appearance, it was what it suggested. Doors go somewhere. They are built to lead. So if this one had opened, someone or something had been on the other side. The following day was a blur. He couldn't focus. Not on emails, not on calls. Everything felt like static. He thought about leaving, going to a friend's place, or even checking into a hotel. But some force held him back. Not just curiosity. It was something deeper, something personal. Like that door wasn't just there for anyone. It was there for him, tailored to him. Like it had waited for just the right moment to reveal itself. And as much as he hated to admit it, part of him wanted to open it. Not for answers, not even for closure, but because something about that door felt familiar, like he'd seen it before, in dreams maybe, or worse, in memory. That night, he sat in the dark again. No light, no distractions, just the closet and the clock. When the knocks came, they were gentler, almost polite, as if whoever was behind the door knew he was listening now, knew he was close. Then came the voice. Not a scream, not even words, just a hum, soft, low, and undeniably human. It carried no threat, only sorrow. That was the first time he felt the weight of it, the sadness, as though the knocking wasn't meant to frighten, but to mourn. That changed everything. Suddenly, he wasn't the victim of some haunting. He wasn't being toyed with. He was being called, and whoever or whatever was calling was grieving, not in the way ghosts are said to weep in horror films. This was more intimate, like someone remembering something too painful to speak. That night, he touched the brass knob on the hidden door. It was cold this time, still, as if waiting on him to choose, but he didn't turn it. Not yet, he whispered again, this time softer. I hear you. The humming stopped. The silence returned, and when he finally pulled away, he felt a tear he hadn't noticed fall from his cheek. Morning came without color. Everything felt grey, muted, like the world had been drained of something vital. He moved through his apartment with heavy limbs, as if his body had been awake all night, even though he hadn't left the bed. He didn't open the closet that day. He didn't need to. He felt the door behind it, like a pressure in the walls. The air in the apartment had changed. Thicker, almost damp. The kind of air you breathe in hospitals, or churches, or just before a thunderstorm. And still, beneath the dread, something else pulsed gently inside him. Recognition. Not like remembering a dream, but something deeper. The shape of that door, the chipped paint, the hum behind it. He had seen it before, long ago. Somewhere he had promised himself never to revisit. And now it had come to him. That afternoon he pulled an old photo album out of the drawer beneath the coffee table. It had been there for years, untouched. Dust coated the cover like skin. He wiped it clean and opened it. There, in between the images of birthdays and backyard barbecues, was a photo that stopped his breath. A hallway, narrow, dimly lit, and at the end of it, a white door with a brass knob, just like the one in his closet. He stared at the photo for a long time, fingers trembling. The image was from his childhood home, a house he hadn't spoken of in over 15 years, a place he had left behind, or tried to. The door had led to the basement, a place he never liked, a place filled with shadows and whispers and things no child should have had to hear. But it wasn't the place itself that haunted him. It was what he remembered just beyond that door. Voices arguing, glass shattering, a silence that always came too suddenly. Then footsteps up the stairs, and the sound of someone wiping their tears on the other side of his wall. He had never opened that basement door alone. Not once. His mother told him to never go down there, and he obeyed, because she was always afraid of what she couldn't explain. And he was too. That house was buried now, sold and forgotten, but the memories clung like vines. And now, somehow, that door, his door, had followed him, reappeared, as if grief could manifest into wood and hinges and find its way back into his life. He closed the album, stared at the closet again. Something inside him shifted. He wasn't afraid anymore, not in the usual way. He was still scared, but it wasn't fear of the unknown. It was fear of what he already knew, what he had buried, and what had now returned to be seen. That night the knocking didn't come, nor the humming, but the door was still there, waiting, and this time he opened the closet before midnight. Clothes brushed his arm as he reached through, slowly pushing them aside like parting tall grass. The door stood silently, no glow, just its solid presence. He reached for the brass knob and turned it. It didn't resist. With a soft creak, it opened inward, revealing not a hallway, not a void, but something impossible. A replica of the basement stairs from his childhood home. The same cracked steps, the same yellow light bulb hanging from a thin cord, the same faint smell, dust, old wood, and something else. Something like sorrow made real. He should have stepped back, should have closed the closet and left the apartment. But instead he stood there, staring into the memory that had opened itself like a wound. He called out softly, "Is someone there?" His voice barely echoed. No reply, but he thought he heard movement. Not footsteps, just the shuffling of something being rearranged. Furniture, paper, time. He stepped through the door. His foot touched the top step. It didn't feel like a dream. It felt solid, cold, real. With every step down, he felt younger, not in body, but in mind. Like the years were peeling away behind him. He reached the bottom of the staircase and saw it. The old couch, the cracked photo frame on the wall, the unfinished puzzles on the table, all recreated with perfect, painful detail. He was no longer in his apartment. He was inside a memory, one he had never willingly walked back into. And on the far side of the room, something moved. He turned, slowly, not with terror, but with the dread of recognition. There was a woman sitting in the old armchair. Her face was turned away, her shoulders hunched. She rocked gently, rhythmically. There was no sound, no weeping, no scream, just the movement, and a sense of overwhelming sorrow that filled the room like smoke. He tried to speak, but found his throat dry. His lips moved before sound could catch up. "Mom." The chair stopped. Her head turned slowly, partway, not enough to reveal her face. But he already knew, not by sight, but by the gravity in the air. The grief, the unanswered questions. She never responded, never stood. She just turned back and resumed rocking. That's when he heard the knocking. 3 soft raps. But this time, they were coming from behind him. He spun around. The stairs were gone. The door, too. In their place, another hallway. Longer, narrower, stretching far into darkness. And at the very end, another door. Just like the last one. And it knocked again. Knock, 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 knock. He didn't want to follow. He didn't want to keep going. But his feet moved anyway. Down the hallway. Past walls filled with childhood art and old calendar pages. As he reached the door, he noticed something new, writing on the surface, carved in jagged strokes. It said, "If you open this, you'll remember." He hesitated, breath shallow. He was being asked to confront something, not ghosts, not monsters, but memory itself, and the pain it held. He reached out anyway, because the knocking was getting quieter now, and something told him, if he didn't open it soon, it would stop forever. His fingers hovered over the words etched into the door. "If you open this, you remember." They weren't a warning, not really. They were a promise, a challenge, and maybe a plea. He could feel the heat of memory building behind the knob like steam behind a closed valve. Everything in him said turn back, but there was nothing left behind him. No staircase, no apartment, no safety net. This was the kind of door that changed you once you passed through it. He closed his eyes, exhaled slow, and turned the knob. It gave easily, as if the door had been waiting for years to feel his hand. With a push, it opened into a room bathed in soft amber light. The light of late afternoon spilling in through window blinds. He knew this room, instantly, down to the creak of the floor. It was his childhood bedroom, not a recreation, not a dream. It was the room, and it hadn't aged a day. There was the twin bed with the crooked headboard, the bookshelf he built with his mum. The posters on the wall faded but frozen in place. He stepped inside, heart pounding with each memory that lit up like electricity in his brain. Every object told a story. Every corner held echoes of voices long gone. And then the sound came again. Not the knocking, but a low voice, muffled, like someone speaking behind a closed door. He turned toward his closet. It was shut. And behind it, the voice continued. Familiar, almost too familiar. A boy's voice, his own, from long ago. He stepped closer, placing a hand on the knob. The door was warm, and he knew somehow that opening it would not lead to clothes and boxes. It would lead to something buried much deeper. The memory of the day everything changed. He opened the closet, and just like that, he was no longer standing. He was watching a memory play out as if it had never left. A boy himself, no older than 10, sat cross-legged on the floor, arms wrapped around his knees, rocking slowly. The bedroom around him was dark, except for the thin stream of light under the closet door. Muffled voices rose from the hallway, angry, sharp, a man yelling, a woman sobbing, then silence, then the knock. 3 sharp knocks from the hallway closet. Not his closet. That one. The one down the hall. He remembered it now, clear as breath. His mother used to hide there. When she couldn't take the shouting anymore, she would step inside and lock the door from the inside. And when it was safe, she would knock 3 times, quietly, their secret signal, his cue to come open it. But that night, he didn't open it. That night, he sat frozen, listening, waiting, wondering if the silence meant it was over, or just getting worse. The knocking came again, 3 soft knocks, but he was too afraid. Afraid that it wasn't her this time, afraid of what he might find. So he stayed hidden. He didn't move, didn't open the door, and by morning she was gone. Not dead, not missing, just gone. Like she had slipped out through some unseen crack in the world and never looked back. He never saw her again, never heard her voice, and he had never told anyone about the knocking, about how she had waited for him, trusted him, and he hadn't come. That memory had sealed itself shut. Until now, the adult version of him stood there, staring at the boy curled up in fear. The guilt washed over him in waves. That forgotten closet, that moment of hesitation, it had carved something deep into him, even if he hadn't known it. And now, that's what the knocking had always been. Not a ghost, not a haunting, a memory, desperate to be acknowledged, to be forgiven. He took a step closer, reached out toward the boy, wanting so badly to say something, to assure him that it wasn't his fault. But the moment his fingers touched the boy's shoulder, the entire room folded, not shattered, not collapsed, just folded in on itself, like pages turning in reverse. And then he was back, in his apartment, standing in front of his closet, the glow gone, the secret door vanished. His chest rose and fell with long, unsteady breaths. The silence in the room now felt different, not empty, but full of all the things he had buried. The pain, the guilt, the truth. He sank to the floor, staring at the closed closet. Tears streamed freely now, not out of fear, out of remembrance, out of release. That door, whatever it was, had given him something he never thought he deserved, a second chance to see what he couldn't face. And while it hadn't brought his mother back, it had shown him where the wound had started, and in doing so, it had started to heal. Days passed, peacefully. No more knocking, no more humming, just quiet mornings and quiet nights. The air in the apartment felt lighter. His sleep deepened. He began to cook again, walk outside, smile at strangers, but he kept the closet door slightly ajar. Not out of fear this time, but as a sign, a quiet acknowledgement, that some doors once opened don't need to be closed again. They become part of you, like scars, like lessons, and sometimes, when the night is still and the wind brushes past the windows just right, he thinks he hears it, the faintest knock, gentle, almost a whisper, and when he does, he smiles, because now he understands. It began again on a Thursday, a quiet, forgettable Thursday, one of those grey afternoons where the sky can't decide whether to rain or simply sulk. He was slicing apples in the kitchen, half listening to a podcast, when he heard it. Not a knock, not a hum, but something else entirely. A voice, a soft voice, like someone speaking through a wall. He froze. At first he thought it might have come from the hallway, or a neighbor's unit, but then he heard it again, clearer this time, low, gentle, and unmistakably familiar. It said his name, not in a question, not in a scream, just a soft, calm calling of it, as if someone were reaching out from memory again. He turned off the podcast. Silence. The refrigerator hummed. Nothing else. And yet, he knew where it had come from. The closet. He stood outside the door for nearly 5 minutes, unmoving. The crack of light beneath the frame remained unchanged. The closet had been ordinary for weeks. No secret passage, no glowing door, just coats and boxes, and the quiet of healing. He'd nearly convinced himself it had all been psychological, something his mind had built to force him into facing the truth about his mother's absence. A therapeutic hallucination, maybe, a gift from grief. But hearing his name again, in that voice, it unraveled, that calm. Because no hallucination knows how you liked your name pronounced when you were 5. No memory mimics a tone that only a parent used in lullabies. He opened the closet slowly. Nothing. No strange door. No staircase. Just the soft smell of dust and cloth. But then, barely audible, he heard it again. Come back. The whisper was not pleading. It was inviting, like a thread being pulled gently through fabric. He stepped inside the closet and shut the door behind him. Darkness. The kind that settles not just around you, but inside you. His hand fumbled along the wall. Nothing. Then he whispered back, barely trusting his own voice. Why? For a long time, there was no answer. Just stillness. He sighed. It was over, a trick of the mind, maybe. But just as he reached for the door to leave, something gave way beneath his foot. The floor shifted, dipped. Not a hole, but a step. A step down. And there it was again. That hum, low, steady, like a voice drawn out into vibration. He lowered himself, felt around, and slowly, almost naturally, a new set of stairs revealed itself, just as before. But this time, they weren't wood. They were stone, cold, ancient, covered in a fine powder, like ash or forgotten dreams. He descended, not quickly. Each step felt like a year being peeled back. The air grew heavier. This wasn't a memory. It wasn't familiar. This was new. Whatever lay ahead wasn't something he had repressed. It was something he had never met before, and that made it worse. Because memory can be anticipated, but the unknown is hungry. The stairs ended in a narrow corridor. Stone walls stretched endlessly in both directions. Torches flickered along the sides, as if someone or something had been expecting him. At the far end, a wooden door stood half open. From behind it, he could hear movement. Not the shuffling of feet, but the turning of pages, and breathing. He moved toward it, slowly, pushed it open, and stepped into the strangest room he had ever seen. It looked like a study. Books lined every wall, old, ancient, bound in materials he didn't recognize. And in the center, a desk, large, ornate, like something from a cathedral. Sitting behind it was no one, but the chair was still rocking, recently vacated. On the desk, a single piece of paper, blank except for one line. This time, you must remember for someone else. His stomach dropped. The voice hadn't called for him. Not entirely. It was calling him back, because someone else had become lost. Someone who had forgotten. Someone who needed him. And just then, a second door creaked open across the room. He turned, and there, standing in the threshold, was a figure he couldn't see clearly, shrouded in shadow. But the posture, the way the figure tilted its head, it reminded him of someone. A friend, maybe, or a brother. But he had no siblings. Not that he remembered. Still, The familiarity struck him like wind. The figure didn't speak, didn't move, just waited, so he walked toward it. As he got closer, he saw flashes, not images, emotions, despair, confusion, shame, love. The figure was trembling, and then it whispered, "I don't know who I am." The voice cracked like dry wood. It sounded young, broken, and in that instant, he understood. This wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone like him. Someone who had found a door they couldn't close, who had gotten lost inside the dark. And now they had called out, hoping that someone else might still remember them, might still care enough to come back. He reached out his hand. "You're not alone," he said, and the figure took his hand slowly, like learning how to feel again. When their hands touched, the room disappeared, not in violence, but in peace. Like the ending of a song, they were standing now in a field, night sky overhead, stars wide and endless. The figure beside him took a breath, a real breath, and began to cry, silent, gentle tears. He let them, because sometimes remembering isn't loud. Sometimes it's just showing up, sitting beside someone who doesn't know how to ask for help. That night, they sat together in the quiet, and the man realized something important. The knocking hadn't just been for him. It had been for anyone listening, anyone who'd ever shut the door on a pain too great to name. This place, this hidden door, it wasn't a punishment. It was an invitation, a bridge between forgotten hearts. The next morning came slower than usual. Light filtered through the curtains like soft breath against skin. He sat at the edge of his bed, unsure whether the night before had been real or dreamed. But there was a lingering warmth in his hand, his right one, the same hand he had offered to the shadowed figure. It wasn't tingling, it wasn't glowing, but it felt full, like something had been placed in it. Even if it wasn't physical, he turned it over slowly, staring at his palm, wondering if that kind of connection reaching into the dark for someone else was supposed to leave a mark. And in a way, maybe it had, because everything in the apartment felt different now. The silence didn't press against him anymore. It sat beside him, waiting, listening, and the closet door, though still slightly ajar, had not made a sound since. He didn't open it. Not yet. He wasn't afraid, just patient. Something inside him knew this wasn't the end. The whisper from the voice, the broken figure in the dark, it had all felt like a beginning, a ripple, not a conclusion. For the next few days he returned to his routine, work, short walks, long silences. But each time he passed the closet, he paused, not out of anxiety, but reverence, because now he understood something vital, that the door wasn't about haunting, it was about inviting, and it wasn't just his past calling through it. Others had doors too, closets, attics, forgotten places where memories go to wait. And sometimes those memories call for help, not to be fixed, but to be found, to be remembered by someone. It was a week later when the knocking returned, but it was different this time. Slower, softer, not the 3 sharp taps from before, just one. Then silence, then another. He stood in the hallway, his ears tuned completely. The sound didn't come from his closet this time. It came from behind the hallway mirror. A decorative piece hung directly across from his bedroom. He had passed it 1,000 times, never once imagining it hid anything. But now, standing before it, he noticed something strange. The glass didn't reflect his hallway. It reflected something else. A hallway, yes, but not his. Different wallpaper, different lighting, a child's drawing taped to the wall. He leaned in closer, and there it was again, another knock from inside the mirror. His breath caught in his throat. He reached out and touched the glass. It was cold, but not solid. His hand moved through it slowly, like slipping through water. On the other side, the hallway stretched into a dimly lit house. He stepped forward, heart pounding. As he crossed the threshold, the air shifted. It smelled of crayons, dusty carpet, and something burnt, toast, maybe. Familiar, home-like. He looked around, scanning the space. Everything about the hallway was intimate, yet unfamiliar. Then he saw her, a little girl, no older than 7, sitting on the floor at the far end of the hall, her knees pulled tightly to her chest. She was staring straight ahead, at a door with a gold doorknob, a closet, and she was whispering something under her breath, over and over again. He walked toward her, careful not to startle her. As he got closer, he could make out her words. "I didn't mean to close it. I didn't mean to." Her voice was trembling, caught between panic and guilt. He knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on the floor, so she could see he wasn't a threat. She didn't look at him. She just kept staring at the door. "Is someone inside?" he asked softly. She nodded, then whispered, "My brother." Her eyes welled with tears. "He asked me not to close it. He was hiding in there. He was scared, and I closed it. I thought it was a game." The guilt in her voice was the same he had carried for years, the same weight, the same ache. He looked at the closet. It was quiet now, still, but the gold knob seemed to pulse gently, as if something inside was waiting to be remembered. He stood and moved toward the door. As his hand touched the knob, a flood of images hit him, not his own, but the girls, running through the house, playing, laughing, and then a scream, a crash. Her brother, older, gentle, grabbing her hand and pulling her into the hallway. "Go hide," he had said. "Hide in the closet. I'll come find you." But he hadn't, because she'd gotten scared and closed the door, locked it, and something terrible had happened in the moments after. Something that had left the house silent. The memory ended there, but the closet hadn't forgotten. The knocking had started just days ago. Gentle, rhythmic, as if the boy inside had been waiting all this time, waiting to be let out, not in body, but in memory, in love. He turned the knob, the door opened slowly. The closet was empty, except for a single toy car on the floor. Blue, scratched, loved. He picked it up and turned to the girl. "Is this his?" She nodded, tears now spilling freely. He walked back and placed it in her hand. "You didn't mean to close the door," he said gently. "You didn't know, but he's not angry. He's just waiting for you to remember him." She looked up at him for the first time, her eyes wide and soft, carried years of grief she hadn't known how to name. And now she understood. She clutched the toy to her chest and whispered, "I remember him." And just like that, the house changed. The hallway brightened, the air warmed, the wallpaper shimmered like light, returning to a photograph. He looked toward the mirror, now shimmering at the end of the hallway, inviting him back. He took one last look at the girl. She smiled, small but sure. "Thank you," she whispered, and he stepped through, back into his apartment, back into the present. The mirror returned to normal, just glass, just reflection, but he no longer looked the same, not older, not different, just fuller, stronger. The knocking hadn't returned since, but now When he walks through his home, he listens with new ears, not just for sounds, but for silences that once held grief, for quiet corners holding pain, because he's not afraid of the knocking anymore. He understands it now. It's not a threat, it's a voice, and some voices need a witness. The days that followed were quiet, but not in the way that silence used to haunt him. It was the kind of quiet that feels sacred. Still, like standing in the middle of a cathedral and knowing you're not alone, even if no one else is visible. The apartment seemed to breathe differently now. The air moved more freely. The shadows weren't as sharp. And most importantly, he had stopped dreading the sound of the closet door. In fact, he found himself standing in front of it every morning, waiting, not because he was obsessed or addicted to the mystery, but because something inside him knew this wasn't over. There were more voices, more rooms, more people trapped inside forgotten echoes, waiting for someone, anyone to remember them. It was on the 11th night that he heard it again. Not knocking, not voices, but music, faint, fragile, like an old record playing in the distance, crackling with age. It wasn't coming from the closet or the mirror. It was coming from beneath the floor, specifically under his bed. He moved it aside, though he wasn't sure what he expected to find. And there it was, a small hatch, rusted, latched from the outside, as if it had been closed to keep something in. He hesitated. The music was growing louder, more distinct now. A piano, something classical, maybe, but off-tempo, as though someone was playing it with trembling hands. He unlatched the hatch. Cold air rushed out like breath, long held. Then he descended, into a place that felt older than memory. The staircase was narrow, lined with old portraits on either side, but the faces had no features, just smudges, as if time itself had rubbed them away. At the bottom was a hallway, lit by a flickering chandelier. The piano grew louder. At the end of the hall, double doors stood wide open. Inside, a grand ballroom, dusty, cracked, forgotten, but alive with sound. No one was dancing. No one was playing. The piano moved on its own, the keys tapping under invisible fingers. He stepped in slowly. As he crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind him. But he didn't flinch. He had learned that fear had no power here, not the kind of fear built from movies or monsters. This place was built on a different kind of fear, being forgotten. He approached the piano. As he got closer, the room began to shift. The dust cleared. The floor polished itself. Candles lit, chandeliers sparkled, and suddenly the ballroom was no longer empty. Dozens of people appeared, silent, ghost-like, but vivid. They danced in pairs, moved to the rhythm of grief and memory. Some looked young, some were older, some were children, but none of them noticed him. And in the corner, sitting on a bench beside the piano, was an old man, frail, still. His eyes were fixed on the keys, even though his hands never touched them. The piano played his memory for him. The man didn't blink, didn't speak, but the sadness in his face was unbearable. The music told his story in chords too delicate to explain. He sat beside the old man. For a long while, they didn't speak. They just listened. Then the man whispered, "I don't know who they are." His voice was raspy, dry from disuse, but they dance every night. They come, and they go, and I just sit here. The man turned to him slowly. Was I one of them? He didn't know how to answer, but then he saw it. A small photograph tucked inside the piano's lid. A boy, a girl, and the man younger, in a military uniform. He picked it up and handed it to him. Do you remember her? The man stared at the photo, then closed his eyes. She had red shoes, always red. Even when it rained, a smile touched the corners of his mouth. And suddenly, one of the dancing figures, one wearing red shoes, turned and looked straight at them. She began walking toward the bench, slowly, dreamlike. The old man trembled. I think that's her. The woman stopped in front of him, knelt down, and touched his face. No words were spoken, but something passed between them. A recognition, a reunion, a forgiveness. And then slowly, she reached out and placed her hand on the piano. The music changed, softer now, slower, a farewell in melody. The ballroom began to dissolve again. The dancers vanished, the candles dimmed, and the man turned to him and said, "Thank you. I thought I had been left behind." He shook his head. "You weren't. You were just waiting to be remembered." The man smiled, closed his eyes, and faded, like breath on glass, leaving only silence behind. He stood alone in the ballroom now, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full, as if the walls themselves had been fed something they'd longed for. He walked back up the stairs, through the hatch, and into his room. The music no longer played, but in the corner of the room now sat a red pair of shoes, small, worn, as if someone had left a gift behind. He picked them up and held them for a long time. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the closet, the mirror, the bed, waiting, listening, not with fear, but with hope, because he understood now. Some of these doors, these hatches and passages and hidden spaces, they weren't about escaping. They were about remembering, about healing what was buried. He wasn't being haunted. He was being trusted, and that changed everything. It had been 2 weeks since the ballroom. 2 weeks since the red shoes appeared, since the old man smiled for the first time in decades, since the music stopped playing. And yet, his apartment had never felt more alive. Not louder, but richer, as if the walls now remembered too. He wasn't sure how many doors he had opened, or if they'd ever truly stop appearing. But he'd learned one truth. Some doors don't ask to be found. They choose the ones who need them most. And maybe he had needed them just as much as they needed him. For the first time in years, he no longer felt like a man simply living alone. He felt accompanied, surrounded, not by ghosts, but by memory, by stories waiting to breathe again. That's when the mail started arriving. Not at his front door, not from a postman, but slipped underneath the closet door, one envelope at a time. At first, he ignored it. Maybe he was imagining things, but then a second envelope came, then a third. Each one was addressed to a name he didn't recognize, but the return address was always the same. No street, no city, just a word. Remember. He finally opened one. Inside was a child's drawing, crayons on construction paper, a house, a sun, a figure with a big smile and a note. "I miss you, Mommy." The paper was worn, creased, like it had been held by small fingers for years. He opened the second, a poem, rough, clumsy rhymes written in pencil. The third, a photograph of 2 teenagers in front of a high school gym, one holding a trophy, both laughing. He didn't understand, at least not at first, but then he realized these weren't for him. He was the messenger, the witness, the keeper of the door. Each letter belonged to someone else, someone who had been lost, or who had done the losing. And for reasons he couldn't explain, the door had chosen him to carry the weight of these memories. The closet wasn't just a gateway, it was a bridge, a mailbox for the forgotten, a last attempt at connection. So he began keeping the letters in a shoebox, reading each one, saying each name out loud. And one night, something changed. When he whispered one name, Angela Reyes, he felt a shift in the room. The temperature dipped, the air moved, and the mirror across the hallway shimmered again. He stepped forward, whispered the name again, Angela Reyes. This time the mirror responded. A faint glow behind the glass. He stepped through. Another hallway. Another place trapped in time. This one was smaller, dimmer. A single hospital room at the end of a corridor. Inside, an elderly woman sat beside a bed. Eyes closed, breathing shallow, holding a single drawing in her hand. The same crayon drawing from the envelope. The figure in the drawing wore the same necklace, now resting on her chest. He stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do. But then, the light shifted. The woman stirred, and a child appeared beside her, not physically, but in presence. A little boy, glowing faintly, standing by her bedside, whispering her name. The woman opened her eyes. Slowly, "Matty," she whispered. Her voice cracked like paper. The boy nodded, smiled, and she wept, not from pain, but from relief. "You waited for me," she said. He reached out, touched her face. His fingers left no mark, but they carried warmth. "I never stopped looking," he whispered back. She clutched the drawing tighter. The machines in the room began to quiet, not from failure, but from peace. Her breathing softened, and then the room faded. The boy faded with it, but her smile remained, forever etched in the stillness. And once again he, the witness, stood alone, holding the memory, holding the proof that sometimes the ones we love never truly leave. They just wait, in the spaces we forget to check. When he returned to his apartment, he didn't close the closet door. Not anymore. It remained open. A reminder, a welcome. The shoebox of letters sat by his bed now, like a journal of strangers whose lives briefly brushed his own. Sometimes he would open it at night and read one aloud, just in case the right ear was listening. Because that's what he was now, a voice in the quiet, a bridge, a keeper of echoes, and the loneliness that once used to ache inside his chest had softened into something entirely new purpose. He didn't need to understand the how or why anymore. He didn't need science or logic, or even names for what was happening. He just knew when the door knocked, he would answer, every time. On the final night of that chapter in his life, one last envelope arrived. But this one had no name, just a single line written in familiar handwriting. "You're not forgotten either." Inside the envelope was a small object, a photograph, one he hadn't seen in years. A birthday party, a cake, a boy with messy hair, and his mother, arms wrapped around him, laughing. He felt his knees go weak. That photo had been lost in a move, or so he thought. He stared at it for a long time, until the image blurred with tears. It was the door's way of saying, "You gave memory to others, but you have one too." That night, he didn't wait for a knock. He simply opened the door and whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time, the door didn't open to a hidden room or a forgotten person. It opened to a feeling, light, warmth, familiar voices laughing in the distance, the scent of his mother's perfume, a dinner table full of stories. And he understood then sometimes the greatest doors don't take you elsewhere. They bring what you've lost back to you, even if only for a moment. And sometimes that's enough. The mornings felt different now, softer somehow, not quieter. No, the silence had texture now. It hummed gently through the walls, as if every inch of the apartment had grown a voice of its own. He began to wake up not out of restlessness, but curiosity. Every morning something small would change. A crack in the ceiling would vanish. A bulb that had burned out years ago would flicker to life. A corner he'd long forgotten to dust would be suddenly clean, untouched by his own hands. These weren't coincidences anymore. They were acknowledgements, little signs that the house, or whatever lived between its walls, was grateful that he had listened, that he had opened the doors, read the letters, whispered the names. He stopped seeing the closet as a threat. It was now a threshold, a place of stillness, like a temple. It no longer waited to scare, it waited to serve, but the mirror across from it began to change, too. Not just in reflection. The glass would sometimes shimmer, even when he wasn't near it. Sometimes it showed him things that hadn't happened yet. People he didn't know. A girl sitting in a school hallway, hugging her knees, whispering secrets into the folds of her jeans. A man standing in a forest, staring at a tree carved with the words, "I'm sorry." These weren't dreams. He saw them wide awake, and he realized there were still doors left unopened. But now, they weren't just physical. Some doors were people. It happened on a Tuesday. No knock, no letter, just a feeling, like someone was watching, not to harm him, but to ask something. He followed it, that feeling, like a thread. It led him to the laundry room, a space he rarely used. He opened the door and felt the air drop, cold, not freezing, but hollow, as if someone had just stepped out, leaving behind their absence. In the far corner, behind the water heater, was a patch of wall that didn't match the rest. It was newer, painted over hastily, like something had been sealed. He touched it, and it sounded hollow. And then, before he could even reach for tools, it peeled away, as if the house allowed it. Behind it was nothing. Not a room, not a tunnel, just space. Like he had ripped into a place that didn't obey geometry. He stepped through, and the air changed again. This time, it was thick with emotion. He couldn't name it. It was heavier than grief, lighter than joy. A strange nostalgia, like remembering a dream you never had. He walked carefully, though there was no floor, just feeling. The world around him was soft, muted, shapes formed and vanished. And then he heard a voice, not a scream, not a whisper, a voice, clear, familiar. "I didn't want to leave you." He stopped, looked around. Who's there? Silence. Then the voice again, this time behind him. "You were just a kid. You didn't understand." And then it clicked. Dad, it couldn't be. He hadn't heard that voice in over 20 years. Not since the car accident. Not since the night that reshaped the rest of his childhood. He spun around, and for the first time, he saw him, not as a ghost, not as a hallucination, but as a presence. Still young, still warm, wearing the same jacket he wore that final night. Tears welled up instantly. "Is this real?" he asked. His father stepped forward. "It's real enough to heal what we didn't say." He choked on breath. So many years of silence, of blame, of wondering why. "Why didn't you tell me goodbye?" His father lowered his head. "Because I didn't know it was the end. I thought I had more time. We always think we do." The two stood in that space for what felt like hours. No ticking clock, no gravity, just a shared history unfolding without shame. "I missed you," he whispered. His father's eyes softened. "I never left. I've been waiting for you to come here." And then he remembered something, a moment buried deep. The last birthday card his father ever gave him, tucked in a book, long lost in some move. It had one line, "When you're ready to forgive, I'll be listening." And now here he was, listening. "I forgive you," he said. Not because it erased the years, not because it fixed everything, but because it freed him. His father smiled. "Then I can rest, and you can go back." As he stepped back through the opening, the space behind him folded inward, gently, like a book closing on its final chapter. He was back in the laundry room, but he felt lighter, taller somehow, as if some invisible weight had been cut from his shoulders. That night, he sat at the edge of his bed and wept, not from fear or confusion, but release. Because this time, the door had opened for him, not for strangers, not for lost souls, but for his story, for the boy who had waited too long to grieve. And suddenly, all of it made sense. Every knock, every shimmer, every envelope. The house wasn't just haunted, it was haunting back. Yes, but it was also healing, reaching into his own forgotten corners and stitching the pieces together, thread by unseen thread. And that was when he heard it again. The knock, this time, not from the closet, not from under the bed, but from the front door. And something told him this knock was different. He stood frozen in front of the front door, listening. The knock didn't come again, but the echo of it lingered in the air, as if the sound itself hadn't finished speaking. It wasn't loud, not urgent, but there had been something in it, a familiarity he couldn't place, a polite sort of patience, as though whoever, or whatever, was on the other side was waiting not out of need, but respect. He took a breath, reached for the handle, and opened the door slowly. But there was no one there. No package, no flyer, no shadows fleeing down the hallway. Only silence, stillness. And then he noticed the envelope, neatly tucked under the welcome mat, as if it had been slipped there with intention, not carelessness. He bent down and picked it up. This one was heavier than the others, slightly thicker paper, and when he turned it over, his heart dropped, because this time, the name written on the front was his. Not just his first name, his full name, including the middle one he never used. Written in handwriting he hadn't seen since childhood, his mother's. His fingers trembled as he peeled it open. Inside was no letter, no photo, just a single pressed flower, and a note, just one line. "You don't need to keep apologizing for the way you disappeared." He stared at it for a long time, not because he didn't understand, but because he did. He knew exactly what it meant. After his father died, he'd changed, closed off, pulled away from the world, from his mother, from friends, from the version of himself that used to laugh. He had disappeared, but not physically. He was still there, still attending school, still going through the motions, but he hadn't been there. Not really. And the guilt had stuck with him long after she passed. It became a secret weight, something he never voiced to anyone, not even to himself, not directly. Yet here it was, a message from nowhere, or from everywhere, from memory, from whatever force had been guiding these letters into his hands. A soft reminder that sometimes forgiveness comes long after the people are gone, but right on time for the healing to begin. He sat at the kitchen table for hours, just holding the flower. He didn't know what kind it was, only that it looked like something from a wild meadow, something untamed. It reminded him of the backyard in the house he grew up in, before the world became complicated, before grief turned the son into a stranger. His mother used to pick flowers from that backyard and place them in a little jar on the windowsill, and now, here it was again, returned to him, from her, or from whatever corner of reality still remembered their love. And suddenly, he realized, this wasn't just about helping others remember. This entire time, the doors, the voices, the letters, They were also here to help him remember. And just as he made peace with that thought, the knocking returned. But this time, not from the door. From inside the walls, he turned toward the hallway, heart pounding, not in fear but in anticipation. The knocks were rhythmic now, almost like a heartbeat, like something breathing in the structure of the building itself. He pressed his ear to the wall, and behind the paint and drywall, he heard something unmistakable. Music, distant, old, like a radio from another time. A slow, gentle jazz tune, playing as if from another room. But there was no other room, just this one. And yet he followed it, step by step, past the hallway, past the mirror, past the closet, to the far end of the apartment. A space he rarely visited, the old guest room. He hadn't opened that door in years. The handle was cold, but smooth, as if someone had just turned it. He pushed it open, and the music swelled, just a little. The room was exactly as he left it. Bare, dusty, a box of old books in the corner. But now there was something else. A new door, not in the wall, in the floor. A wooden hatch, like something from a storybook. It hadn't been there before. He knelt beside it, hands shaking slightly. There was no lock, just a pull ring. He took one last breath, then opened it. What lay beneath wasn't a basement, wasn't stairs. It was light, pure, white, soft light, like the color of memory itself. And the music was louder now, still jazz, but now with a voice, a woman's voice, singing in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood. He climbed down carefully, his body weightless, as if the air itself had agreed to hold him, and then he arrived. He stood in a small cafe, dimly lit, cozy, with candles on each table, but no customers. Only one person stood behind the bar, an older woman, humming softly. She looked up and smiled. "Took you long enough," she said. Her accent was thick, but comforting. He didn't know her, but she seemed to know him. She gestured to a chair. "Sir, waiting for you in the back." He walked slowly to the curtain behind the counter, pulled it aside, and there they were. People, dozens of them, laughing, smiling, holding hands. Some he recognized, some he didn't, but he felt them. He knew them. Every face carried the warmth of a story that had once touched his. They waved, some nodded, some simply looked at him with grateful eyes. At the center of it all, his father and mother, sitting together at a small round table, holding hands. Her eyes welled up when she saw him. His father raised a glass, and suddenly he understood. This was not the afterlife. This was not death. This was memory, preserved, reclaimed, made whole again, and he was their guest for tonight. He stood there for a long while, just watching. The low hum of conversation filled the room, blending with the soft clink of silverware and the quiet jazz from an unseen speaker. It didn't feel strange. It didn't feel haunted. It felt like coming home after a long journey. A journey not measured in miles, but in silence. He hadn't realized how long he'd been carrying certain memories in the dark, how many faces he'd forgotten to grieve, to forgive, to celebrate. And now, here they all were, not like ghosts, but like bookmarks. People who had marked chapters in his life, without ever knowing it. Some smiled and waved, as if no time had passed at all, as if they had simply waited patiently in this quiet corner of eternity for him to remember. He walked slowly past the tables. Each step stirred a different feeling, a pang of regret, a flicker of laughter, a distant echo of a moment he hadn't recalled in years. There was his high school art teacher, the one who'd once told him that pain could be painted, who'd given him his first sketchbook after his father died. There was the neighbor who used to leave fresh bread at their door after his mother fell ill. There was even the librarian who had let him stay past closing just to finish a story he was too afraid to take home. He had forgotten all their names, but the feelings, they had stayed, etched deep in his heart like carvings on old bark. And now those feelings had taken form, given back to him as if to say, "You were never as alone as you thought." His parents sat at the center, surrounded by warmth, laughter, light. His father looked younger now, not in appearance, but in spirit. The weariness he'd worn during his final years was gone. His eyes were bright, playful, forgiving. His mother too looked peaceful, that quiet peace of someone who had finally been understood. They stood when he approached. No words at first, just an embrace. One that felt endless, one that didn't apologize for the years lost, but honored the love that remained. He felt himself shaking, not from fear, from release. Because for so long, he had carried the weight of not knowing if they had understood, if they had forgiven him, if they had ever felt his love after they were gone. And now he did. His mother spoke first. Her voice was softer than he remembered, but steady. "You don't need to chase answers anymore," she said. "You've already found the door." He looked at her, confused. She smiled gently and tapped his chest. "It's here, it always was." His father nodded. "The house didn't choose you. You chose it. You chose to remember." He opened his mouth to respond, but found no words, only tears. There was a quiet understanding between them now, one that didn't require explanation. His mother placed her hand on his and said, "Stay as long as you like, but when you're ready, you'll know how to go back." He nodded slowly, though he didn't want to leave. Not yet. He sat with them for a while, just listening. They didn't talk about death. They didn't talk about pain. They spoke of simple things, of music, of summer days, of the way the light looked when it hit the curtains in the morning. It was like watching the past come alive again, not to haunt, but to remind. And he realized sometimes the most powerful hauntings aren't about what we fear, but what we forget. The cafe, this room, this place, it wasn't built from nightmares. It was built from love, memory, unfinished sentences, and it had waited patiently for him to be ready to walk through it. Eventually, the room began to dim, but not in a way that felt ominous. It felt natural, like dusk settling over a long day. His mother stood first. "It's time," she said gently, "not to leave, but to carry this with you." She placed the pressed flower from the envelope in his palm. His father added a small key, one he'd never seen before. "For when you're ready to open the door for someone else," he said. And then, as gently as the moment had arrived, the scene began to fade. The cafe dissolved into mist. The chairs vanished. The candles snuffed themselves out. And he found himself standing once more in the old guest room. The wooden hatch closed beneath him. But something had changed. He wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. It didn't feel like an absence. It felt like presence, like someone was always there, listening, watching, holding the space open, just in case he ever needed to return. He walked back through the apartment slowly, the flower and key still in his hands. The air felt warmer now, the walls softer, the shadows didn't lurk anymore. They simply waited. And then, just before he reached his bedroom, he noticed something written on the mirror, not in ink, not in fog, but etched lightly in the glass itself. One word. Soon, he didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but he knew it wasn't a threat. It was a promise, a whisper that the journey wasn't over, that there were still more doors to open, not just behind him, but ahead. and for the first time in years he was ready. He didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but reverence, the kind of stillness that wraps around you after something sacred. He sat by the window, the city lights blinking in the distance, his thoughts heavier than usual, but softer. The key his father gave him rested on the table. It wasn't ornate. No strange markings, just a small brass key, the kind that might unlock a diary or a forgotten drawer. But he knew it wasn't meant for something ordinary. Not anymore. The house had changed, or perhaps it had always been this way, and he had only now begun to see it. Doors could hide in plain sight when we're not ready. Sometimes it takes losing everything before you finally notice what's been knocking all along. Morning came slow, pale and delicate. He brewed coffee the same way he always did, but something about the kitchen felt different now, like it had accepted him, welcomed him back. He ran his fingers along the table's edge, remembering arguments, laughter, grief, silence. All those memories still lived here. The house had never been empty. It had simply been waiting for him to return, not just in body, but in spirit. He poured his coffee and walked toward the closet, the original one, the first door that knocked. For days he hadn't dared reopen it, but now he felt no resistance, just a quiet invitation. Inside, everything looked as it had before, clothes hanging still, the faint scent of cedar. But now, at the back of the closet, something had changed. Another door, not new, old, wooden, carved with tiny shapes, stars, vines, faces. He reached out and touched it. The grain of the wood hummed faintly beneath his fingers, like a living thing. He took the key from his pocket. It slid in perfectly, and with a gentle turn the lock clicked, and the door creaked open. What lay beyond wasn't darkness. It was a hallway, endless, dusty, with dozens, no, hundreds of doors lining the walls on either side. Some were labeled, some weren't. Some glowed faintly at the edges. Others sat completely still, untouched by time. He stepped through, and the door shut behind him, not in warning, but in promise, a whisper in his chest. You're not alone here. The hallway stretched on, like a library of memory. Every door, a story. Every story, a life. He walked slowly, reading names he didn't recognize. Dates, words. Some were in languages he couldn't decipher, and yet he understood them, because here, language wasn't the barrier. Emotion was the guide. As he moved deeper into the corridor, he began to feel the stories behind the doors. Some throbbed with pain, others pulsed with joy. Some carried the heavy ache of unfinished conversations. Others hummed with songs never sung aloud. It was overwhelming, but not in a frightening way. It felt sacred, like walking through a cathedral of memory. He realized then that the house didn't just hold his story, it held many. Maybe all of them. At the end of the hall was a single door with no handle, just a frame. Light spilled out from its edges, but it didn't blind. It beckoned, and there on the floor before it sat a figure, not old, not young, neither man nor woman, the kind of face you forget the moment you turn away, but one that makes you feel safe while it's near. The figure looked up at him and smiled. You've come far, they said. Their voice was like wind through leaves, soft, shifting. Many turn back before this point, not because they're cowards, but because they think remembering is the same as reliving. The figure rose slowly, brushing dust from their lap. But you're not here to relive. You're here to carry. He didn't know what to say, but he didn't need to. The figure nodded toward the final door. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of knowing why you were chosen. Why the knocking came to you. Some doors open inward, some open outward, and some, they paused, placing a hand gently on the doorframe. Some are only meant to be held open for others. He looked down at the key in his hand. It was glowing now, faintly, softly. The light, not his own, but something shared, something past. You're not just the visitor anymore, the figure said. You're the keeper now. He stepped through the frame. There was no resistance, no coldness, just light, familiar, gentle. And then, suddenly, he was back. In his bedroom, the key still warm in his hand. But the closet door was no longer a closet. It was gone, and in its place stood a simple, wooden door, just like the others in the hallway. No markings, no lock, just potential. And from the other side, a faint knock. This time he smiled. He walked toward it without fear, opened it slowly, and there, standing on the other side, was someone new, a stranger, eyes wide, lost, shaking, holding a letter, addressed in handwriting he didn't recognize. But that felt important. The stranger looked up at him. I don't know where I am, they whispered, but something told me to knock. He stepped aside and held the door open. Come in, he said softly. You're not alone anymore. The girl stepped into the room as though the air might shatter around her. She was young, early 20s maybe, but the heaviness in her eyes belonged to someone who had carried too many years alone. Her hands trembled slightly as she held out the envelope she carried. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It was worn, the edges curled, as if it had passed through many hands before finally reaching his. He didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. Some part of him, some quiet part that had awakened since he walked through those hidden doors, understood that names weren't what mattered here. It was the weight we carried. The stories left untold, the grief we swallowed without knowing how to grieve. He gestured toward the old chair near the window, and she sat down like someone who hadn't rested in years. For a moment, silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not cold. It was the kind of silence that asks questions without demanding answers. She looked around the room like she was trying to decide whether she was awake or dreaming. I followed the knocking, she whispered. Her voice cracked in the middle, like an old record. I thought it was in my head, like maybe I was finally breaking. He nodded slowly. You're not, he said gently. Or maybe you are, but not in the way you think. She stared at the envelope in her lap, running her fingers over the edge. I don't remember writing this, she said, but it's my handwriting, and it has today's date. He didn't try to explain. He didn't talk about the house or the doors or the things he had seen. She wasn't ready for that. And besides, it wasn't his story to tell. It was hers. He'd learned that much already. These doors didn't just connect places. They connected people, carried their pain, their unfinished moments, their forgotten words. And when one heart found another, sometimes that was enough to crack the silence open. She opened the envelope slowly. Her hands still shook, but less now. Inside was a single photograph, faded, crumpled, two people, her and another woman, older, smiling in the sun. He watched her stare at it for a long time. My mother, she said quietly. I haven't looked at this picture in I don't know how long. Tears didn't fall right away. They hovered, danced, sat in the corner of her eyes like they too were waiting for permission. We fought, she said, her voice barely audible. The last time I saw her, I said things I shouldn't have. She said things she didn't mean. I walked out. I never went back. She looked up at him. She died 2 days later. A car accident. and I never got to say I was sorry. The words landed like soft stones, not loud, but heavy. He knew that ache, knew how it lived in the corners of your chest, whispering at night when everything else had gone quiet. She clutched the photo, like it could crumble into dust. I thought I'd moved on, she continued, but last week I heard knocking in my sleep. Every night, I followed it until I found a door where there wasn't one. And then, I found this place. He didn't tell her the house had brought her here. She already knew. Some part of her had known the moment she crossed the threshold. "Can I see her?" she asked. Her voice was small like a child, asking if the storm had passed. He hesitated, not because he doubted, but because he didn't know. Not yet. The doors weren't his to control. They opened when the heart was ready, not when the mind demanded. "I think," he said carefully, "you might find her if you go through the hallway." She looked confused, but not afraid, just curious. "There's a hallway?" she asked. He nodded and gestured toward the room where his old closet had once been. Now it held the wooden door, the same one that had once knocked for him. He stood and led her to it. The door didn't hum this time, it simply waited. She reached out and placed her hand on the knob, then paused. "Will it hurt?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "Maybe," he said honestly, "but not in the way you fear, not forever." She nodded and opened the door. The hallway was there, timeless, long, lined with stories. She stepped through without looking back, and the door remained open. For a while he stood there in the quiet, wondering what she would find, who she would meet, what memories might rise up to meet her. When she returned hours later, or maybe minutes, time didn't seem to work the same here. Her eyes were red but peaceful. She held something in her hands, a small silver ring. She didn't say where it had come from. She didn't need to. He simply nodded. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and sat beside him like she'd always belonged there. She remembered, she whispered. She wasn't angry. She was just waiting. He didn't respond. Sometimes silence was the greatest comfort. She stayed until evening. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. And when she finally stood to leave, she looked back and said, "But maybe we all deserve to be heard, even if it's too late." He smiled. "It's never too late," he said. As the door closed behind her, he felt the quiet again. Not emptiness, but readiness, like the house was taking a deep breath. He realized then that this was what it meant to be the keeper, not a guardian of secrets, but a steward of healing, a witness, someone to hold the space long enough for someone else to walk through it. There would be more. He could feel it. More knocks, more strangers, more stories waiting for their final words. He wasn't sure how long this would go on, maybe for the rest of his life, maybe longer, but for the first time, that didn't scare him, because he understood now. Every knock wasn't a warning. It was a request to be let in. The next knock came on a Thursday afternoon, just as the sky began to weep. Rain tapped gently on the window pane like tiny fingers, as if the weather itself anticipated another arrival. He had been reading, though not really. His eyes traced the words, but his mind was distant. Since the girl had left, the house had returned to its calm silence. But it wasn't empty. It breathed differently now, like it was listening, preparing. When the knock came, he didn't jump this time. He just stood, quietly, and walked to the door. There was no urgency in the knock, just a quiet rhythm. 3 taps, A pause, then two, as if someone were trying to remember how to ask for help. He opened the door to find a man in his 40s, soaked from head to toe. His jacket clung to him, heavy with water, and in one hand he clutched an old wristwatch, broken, the face cracked, and the hand stuck at 3:17. The man looked down, embarrassed, as though he had arrived at the wrong place. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice hoarse. "I just started walking, and then there was this house. I swear it wasn't here before." The keeper offered no explanations, just stepped aside and nodded. "You're not lost," he said gently. "You're just ready." The man hesitated before crossing the threshold. As he entered, he looked around with the slow, cautious gaze of someone who had been disappointed by every place he'd been before. The house welcomed him, its warmth wrapping around him like a blanket taken out of storage. The keeper handed him a towel, which the man accepted with a grateful nod. He sat on the edge of the couch, wringing water from the towel, still gripping the watch like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the moment. "It stopped the day my brother died," he said without prompting. "I've carried it ever since. It's the only thing I have left." The keeper said nothing. He simply listened. The man's hands were rough, calloused. His eyes carried a weariness that went deeper than tiredness. It was sorrow layered over itself too many times. "We hadn't spoken in 10 years, the man continued. "Not since our father died. We fought over everything, money, the funeral, even the ashes. I thought I hated him, and maybe I did, but then I got the call. He was gone. Just like that." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't even know he was sick." He looked down at the watch. "He left this for me, mailed it, no note. Just this." The rain continued outside, tapping like a metronome. The keeper sat across from him, allowing the silence to settle again. It wasn't heavy, just patient. The kind of silence that waits until you're ready to speak. "I've worn it every day since," the man said. "It doesn't work, but I don't know. It's like if I take it off, then the last thing connecting us disappears." He chuckled bitterly. "We were stupid. We wasted so much time." The keeper leaned forward slightly. "Maybe time isn't what you lost," he said gently. "Maybe it's what's still left that you're afraid of." The man looked at him, startled. He blinked. Something about the words had cracked a door open in his heart. "I hear knocking at night," he whispered. "Sometimes in my dreams. Sometimes when I'm awake. I thought it was just guilt. Or maybe the house settling." He paused. "But it's always at 3:17. The keeper stood and nodded toward the door at the back, the one that had replaced the closet. "There's someone waiting for you," he said softly, "but you'll have to go alone." The man looked down at the watch. It was glowing faintly now, just beneath the surface. Not enough to see clearly, just enough to feel. He stood, shoulders squared like a man walking into a storm. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind him. The keeper waited. It was nearly dusk when he returned. When the man stepped back into the room, the watch was ticking. Not loudly, not perfectly, but moving. He held it up, astonished. "He forgave me," he said. "I didn't even ask. He just said it wasn't worth carrying anymore." The man sank into the couch, tears streaming down his face. He remembered the good things, the bike rides, the way we used to sneak out of school. He even remembered the time we built a treehouse and fell out of it. He laughed. I hadn't heard his laugh in so long. The keeper smiled. "That laugh was waiting for you," he said. The man stayed until the rain stopped, and then without ceremony, he stood. He placed the watch on his wrist. now ticking steadily, and turned to the door. "I don't know who you are," he said, "or what this place really is, but thank you for answering." The keeper nodded. "This house only knocks when you're ready to listen." The man smiled, eyes wet, and stepped out into the night. And once again, the keeper was alone, but not lonely, because he could feel the pulse of the house now, its heart beating steady, a rhythm of grief and healing. The quiet sound of doors unlocking, not with keys but with courage. The next knock didn't sound like the ones before. It wasn't hesitant or rhythmic. It was dull, almost apologetic, as if the one on the other side wasn't sure they were allowed to knock at all. The keeper rose from his chair without a word. The air felt heavier today, like the walls were holding their breath. When he opened the door, a woman stood there, small-framed and expressionless. She didn't speak. Her eyes were distant, vacant, as if she'd come from a place where language had long since lost its purpose. She wore a simple coat, one button missing. Her shoes were soaked in red clay. She didn't carry a bag, just a small, crumpled piece of paper clutched tightly in her hand. He stepped aside and held the door open. She entered slowly, glancing around like she was trying to remember something long forgotten. She sat without being asked, folding her hands in her lap. The note remained closed. He didn't pressure her. He knew enough now to let the silence do its work. The house did the rest. The fireplace crackled softly, and a warm draft drifted through the hall. After a while, she looked at him and opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Not even a whisper, just a breath. Her lips trembled. She looked down and shook her head, defeated. He gave a gentle smile. "You don't need words," he said. "You're already heard." She nodded, tears threatening to fall. Then she placed the note on the table between them. He waited. After a long pause, she pushed it toward him. He opened it gently, unfolding it like a fragile leaf. There were only 4 words written in shaky, childlike handwriting. "He was my son," just beneath, a faint thumbprint smeared in ink. No date, no signature, no explanation, but none was needed. He understood, the kind of grief that devours sound, that silences the voice, that turns the days into empty shadows of what once was. She hadn't come to explain. She'd come to be near someone who wouldn't ask her to. The keeper leaned back. The room felt colder now, despite the fire. He imagined the child she had lost, how he might have laughed, what he might have loved. A favorite toy, a messy room, the echo of little feet on hardwood, and now only silence. She looked at him then, her eyes glassy and searching, not for answers, just for a place to put her pain. He met her gaze. "Would you like to see him?" he asked softly. Her face twitched, a reaction caught between fear and hope. She nodded, once, slow and deliberate. He stood and gestured toward the door. She followed. They walked together to the wooden door at the back, the door that had once replaced his closet, the door that led not to places, but to what hearts most longed for. He opened it gently, and a familiar hallway stretched before them. She didn't hesitate. The moment it opened, her feet moved forward. The house seemed to exhale as she stepped inside, like it knew this moment had waited too long. The door closed behind her, and for a long time, the keeper sat alone. He watched the fire burn low. The shadows danced. Outside, the rain returned, not heavy, just steady. A soft reminder that the world still moved, even through sorrow. She returned near midnight. Her coat was dry now. Her hands were empty, but something in her face had shifted. She looked older somehow, but lighter. Her eyes no longer searched, they remembered. She sat beside him on the couch. This time, she didn't cry, she just whispered. He held my hand. Her voice cracked, like a violin string, long unplayed. He said he was happy, that he wasn't scared, that he forgave me. Her chest trembled with a breath that had waited years to be released. I hadn't heard his voice in so long, she whispered. I thought I'd forgotten it. The keeper said nothing. He only nodded. She looked down at her empty hands, then smiled faintly. He gave me a flower, she added, as if just remembering. A daisy. He said I used to braid them into his hair when he was little. I didn't even remember that, but he did. Her voice broke. He remembered everything. Silence settled around them, warm and clean. She didn't stay long after that, just enough time to say thank you, to leave with something unnamed but necessary. When she reached the door, she turned to him one last time. I don't know what this place is, she said, her voice calm now, but it gave me a little more time, and that's everything. He nodded. It gives what the heart can hold, he said. The door closed gently behind her, and again the house fell quiet. But it was not emptiness, it was peace. It had been days since the last visitor. The house, once filled with echoes of others' grief, now felt strangely introspective. The keeper had swept the floor, dusted the windowsills, watered a plant in the corner that never seemed to die, but everything felt like waiting. The door hadn't knocked, and the hallway behind the closet remained still. Yet the air had changed, subtle, thicker in the mornings, as though holding its breath. The fireplace burned slower. The books on the shelves seemed to watch him longer than usual. Then one morning, as the sun barely scraped through the curtains, he found a letter at the foot of the door. No knock, no visitor, just a simple envelope, yellowed at the edges, no stamp, no return address. But when he picked it up, he recognized the handwriting immediately. It was his own. His heart beat once loudly, and then seemed to pause. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand. He carried it to the table and sat down, hands resting on either side. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he studied it, as if it might vanish the moment he blinked. There was no date, but he knew. He knew it was the letter he had written the day after his brother died, the one he never sent, the one he had buried in a drawer beneath old tax receipts and birthday cards from people he no longer spoke to. He remembered the night he wrote it, the ache in his chest, the way the pen dug into the page like a needle in skin. He'd written everything he couldn't say at the funeral, the things he'd meant to say before the last phone call. He had wanted forgiveness, but he hadn't known how to ask. So he wrote the letter, then folded it, then hid it, as if hiding it would undo the silence between them. Now here it was, returned. Waiting, he opened it with slow fingers. The paper unfolded like it had been waiting too. The words were his, unchanged, raw, full of pain and regret. He read them all, line by line, until he reached the bottom. And there in handwriting, not his own, were 7 words added beneath his closing sentence. I know, I forgave you long ago. His breath caught. He read the line again, until it blurred. And in that moment, something inside him broke. But not the kind of breaking that leaves a person empty. The kind that clears away rot, that makes room for light. Tears came, slow and quiet, like rain after drought. He wept for the boy who had fought with his brother over petty things. He wept for the man who had missed every chance to make it right. He wept for the years spent pretending it didn't hurt. And when the tears dried, The letter lay gently on the table, like a memory finally released. That night, the door knocked again, but it wasn't the same knock. This one was for him, not the caretaker, not the keeper, but the man who had once opened a closet door and found more than he ever expected. He stood slowly. The house was still. The hallway behind the door glowed faintly, as if lit by something beyond fire or bulb. He stepped inside, and the door closed behind him. The moment the door closed behind him, everything shifted. The familiar weight of the house faded, replaced by a silence so deep it hummed in his bones. The hallway stretched out endlessly, walls lined with photographs, faces he recognized, faces he didn't, all frozen in moments of joy, sorrow, and quiet reflection. He walked slowly, fingertips grazing the frames as if hoping to feel the warmth of the lives they held. The air smelled like old paper and rain. A soft light glowed ahead, beckoning him forward without urgency. This place, he realized, was less a corridor and more a river, carrying memories, regrets, and forgiveness all at once. Ahead, a door appeared, different from the others. It wasn't painted or framed like the rest. Instead, it was raw wood, worn smooth by time, with a simple brass knob that gleamed as if polished just for him. His hand trembled as he reached out and turned the knob. The door opened silently, revealing a room bathed in soft golden light, warm and inviting, like the sun slipping through a window on a lazy afternoon. Inside, a desk sat beneath a large window, overlooking a garden where flowers bloomed in colors he'd never seen, but somehow understood. The desk was cluttered with papers, photographs, and an old typewriter, its keys worn but waiting. He stepped inside, heart pounding. The room felt impossibly familiar, like the memory of a dream he couldn't quite grasp but desperately wanted to. He sat at the desk, fingers brushing the keys, and noticed a single sheet of paper already in place. On it, a letter, unfinished, but written in his handwriting. The words spoke of sorrow and regret, of silence left unbroken, and love left unspoken. The letter was addressed to someone he had lost a lifetime ago, a confession of things too painful to say aloud. He read each line, feeling the weight of his own heart spilled across the page. For the first time, the ache he'd carried felt real, and yet somehow lighter, shared with a presence unseen but deeply felt. As he sat there, the room seemed to breathe with him, the golden light pulsing softly. A voice, gentle and distant, whispered in the stillness. It was not a voice of sorrow but of hope. It told stories of healing, of letting go, and of finding peace in the spaces between pain. The letter before him began to fill with new words, words he didn't remember writing, but somehow understood completely. They spoke of forgiveness given and received, of the courage to face the past, and the promise of a future unburdened by old wounds. Tears blurred his vision, but this time they were tears of release. He pressed the final key on the typewriter and watched as the words solidified. I forgive you. I love you. You are free. When he finally rose from the desk, the room began to fade gently, the golden light softening until it was just a whisper. The door behind him creaked open, leading back to the hallway of photographs, which now seemed to glow a little brighter, as if touched by the letter's truth. He stepped forward feeling lighter, his heart unshackled. The house around him seemed to hum with quiet joy, no longer just a keeper of others' sorrows, but a sanctuary of healing for all who entered, including himself. The door at the end of the hallway opened wide, leading him back to the room he called home. where the knock would wait for the next story, another soul ready to be heard, forgiven, and set free. Returning from the hallway into the quiet house, the door clicked shut behind him with a finality that felt like a deep exhale. He stood there for a long moment, eyes closed, letting the silence settle around him like a soft blanket. It was different now, less hollow, less empty. The air no longer carried the tension of unanswered questions, but the gentle pulse of something new, understanding. For years, the silence between him and the memories had been suffocating. Now it felt like a bridge, fragile but real, waiting to be crossed. The house had given him a gift, one no visitor could have, the chance to face the part of himself he'd locked away. His thoughts drifted back to the letter he had just finished, words that had hung heavy in his chest like stones. Writing it had been an act of courage he didn't know he possessed. And yet, the hardest part had not been writing the letter, but knowing that it might never be read by the one it was meant for. Still, somewhere deep inside, a quiet hope stirred. Maybe, in this place between reality and memory, the letter had found its way to the right hands. Maybe forgiveness didn't need to be spoken aloud to exist. Maybe the echoes of love could cross even the longest distances. He moved toward the closet door, the threshold between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The door waited for him, not with a knock this time, but with a stillness that spoke volumes. He reached out and opened it slowly. The hallway beyond was familiar now, but he saw it differently. The photographs that lined the walls weren't just pictures. They were stories, lives lived, loves lost, moments treasured and mourned. Each frame held a whisper, a fragment of truth. He realized that the house was more than a refuge. It was a living memory, a place where the past could be held gently, without judgment or fear. As he walked down the corridor, the photographs began to change before his eyes. Faces blurred and shifted into new ones. People he hadn't yet met, stories yet to be told. He felt their presence like a breeze brushing against his skin, tender and insistent. One photograph in particular caught his attention. It showed a small child standing alone in a field of wildflowers, eyes wide with wonder and sadness all at once. The child looked directly at him, as if waiting for a hand to reach out and hold theirs. His chest tightened. He knew, without knowing how, that this child's story was next. That the house had brought him here not only to heal himself, but to be a keeper for others still searching for light in the darkness. He returned to the room where the journey had begun, the quiet sanctuary that was his home. Sitting in the worn armchair, he closed his eyes and allowed the emotions to wash over him. He thought about the visitors who had come before, each carrying a pain unique and profound, each leaving with a piece of peace. The house had shown him that grief was not something to be conquered or forgotten, but a river that must be felt and followed until it reached calm waters. And in that realization he found a fragile hope that even the deepest wounds could heal in time, and that no one truly walks alone. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound, almost a whisper from the closet door. The knocking had returned, but gentler now, like a heartbeat. He rose and approached, heart steady but expectant. He opened the door, ready to listen, ready to help, ready to be part of another story waiting to unfold. The house was no longer just a place of mysteries. It was a beacon, a sanctuary, a bridge between pain and healing. And he was its keeper, no longer lost in his own silence, but a guardian of voices waiting to be heard. Returning from the hallway into the quiet house, the door clicked shut behind him with a finality that felt like a deep exhale. He stood there for a long moment, eyes closed, letting the silence settle around him like a soft blanket. It was different now, less hollow, less empty. The air no longer carried the tension of unanswered questions, but the gentle pulse of something new, understanding. For years, the silence between him and the memories had been suffocating. Now it felt like a bridge, fragile but real, waiting to be crossed. The house had given him a gift, one no visitor could have, the chance to face the part of himself he'd locked away. His thoughts drifted back to the letter he had just finished, words that had hung heavy in his chest like stones. Writing it had been an act of courage he didn't know he possessed. And yet, the hardest part had not been writing the letter, but knowing that it might never be read by the one it was meant for. Still, somewhere deep inside, a quiet hope stirred. Maybe, in this place between reality and memory, the letter had found its way to the right hands. Maybe forgiveness didn't need to be spoken aloud to exist. Maybe the echoes of love could cross even the longest distances. He moved toward the closet door, the threshold between the ordinary and the extraordinary. The door waited for him, not with a knock this time, but with a stillness that spoke volumes. He reached out and opened it slowly. The hallway beyond was familiar now, but he saw it differently. The photographs that lined the walls weren't just pictures. They were stories. Lives, lived, loves, lost, moments treasured and mourned. Each frame held a whisper, a fragment of truth. He realized that the house was more than a refuge. It was a living memory, a place where the past could be held gently, without judgment or fear. As he walked down the corridor, the photographs began to change before his eyes. Faces blurred and shifted into new ones. People he hadn't yet met, stories yet to be told. He felt their presence like a breeze brushing against his skin, tender and insistent. One photograph in particular caught his attention. It showed a small child standing alone in a field of wildflowers, eyes wide with wonder and sadness all at once. The child looked directly at him, as if waiting for a hand to reach out and hold theirs. His chest tightened. He knew, without knowing how, that this child's story was next. That the house had brought him here not only to heal himself, but to be a keeper for others still searching for light in the darkness. He returned to the room where the journey had begun, the quiet sanctuary that was his home. Sitting in the worn armchair, he closed his eyes and allowed the emotions to wash over him. He thought about the visitors who had come before, each carrying a pain unique and profound, each leaving with a piece of peace. The house had shown him that grief was not something to be conquered or forgotten, but a river that must be felt and followed until it reached calm waters. And in that realization he found a fragile hope that even the deepest wounds could heal in time, and that no one truly walks alone. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft sound, almost a whisper from the closet door. The knocking had returned, but gentler now, like a heartbeat. He rose and approached, heart steady but expectant. He opened the door, ready to listen, ready to help, ready to be part of another story waiting to unfold. The house was no longer just a place of mysteries. It was a beacon, a sanctuary, a bridge between pain and healing. And he was its keeper, no longer lost in his own silence, but a guardian of voices waiting to be heard. The knocking was soft but insistent, like a whispered plea that refused to be ignored. He opened the closet door slowly, the hallway beyond glowing faintly in the dim light of evening. This time, there was no visitor standing just beyond the threshold. Instead, the corridor stretched deeper than he'd ever seen before, winding away into shadows and soft light. He stepped inside, feeling the familiar pulse of the house around him. It was as if the house itself was waiting, waiting for something or someone long overdue. As he walked, the photographs along the walls flickered, shifting like memories caught in a breeze. Faces appeared and vanished, some joyful, some sorrowful, but one image lingered longer than the rest. It was a woman's face, framed by delicate strands of silver hair, eyes full of quiet sorrow and fierce strength. He recognized her, not from any visitor he'd met, but from somewhere deeper, a place in his own heart that had been locked away. She was a presence that had never truly left, a shadow hovering just beyond his reach. The house was showing him what he'd avoided for so long. He reached the end of the hallway, where the woman stood waiting by a door he'd never seen before. It was worn and faded, with a simple latch that looked fragile yet unyielding. She turned to him, and though she didn't speak, he understood immediately. This was her story, one of loss, of love, of waiting for a moment that never came. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the latch. He stepped forward, offering a silent promise. He would help her find peace. Together, they opened the door, revealing a room filled with soft light and the faint scent of lavender and rain. Inside the room, memories unfolded like pages in a book. He saw scenes of laughter and tears, of promises made and broken, of a life that had ended too soon. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she touched the objects around her, an old quilt, a faded photograph, a locket worn smooth by time. Though she remained silent, her presence spoke volumes. She carried a grief so deep it had become part of her, yet there was also a strength in her stillness, a quiet acceptance that had taken years to find. The house held her gently, offering a space where pain could be felt without fear, and where healing could begin. They sat together in silence, the weight of unspoken words filling the room. He felt the house pulse around them, a steady rhythm that seemed to breathe life into the stillness. The woman finally reached into her coat and pulled out a small, folded letter. Without a word, she handed it to him. He unfolded the paper carefully, reading the lines that told a story of love, lost and forgiveness sought. The letter was addressed to someone who had never received it, and in its words, he felt the hope and sorrow of a heart reaching out across time. He placed the letter on the desk in front of him, feeling the presence of the woman's story becoming part of his own. As the room began to fade, the woman smiled softly, a smile full of gratitude and peace. She turned toward the door, and he followed, knowing this chapter was coming to a close. When they stepped back into the hallway, the photographs glowed a little brighter, the shadows retreating to reveal a path forward. The woman's figure began to dissolve into the light, but the warmth she left behind lingered. He stood alone once more, but no longer burdened by the weight of silence. The house had given him another gift, the understanding that some visitors never truly leave, and some stories continue long after the last knock. Returning to the room that was home, he felt a quiet resolve settling over him. The house was more than a place. It was a keeper of stories, a guardian of grief and healing, and he was no longer just a caretaker. He was a part of this living memory, a bridge between the past and the future, ready to face whatever knock might come next. The night deepened outside, and as the fire flickered low, he closed his eyes, letting the peace of the house wash over him. The knocking would return. It always did, but now he was ready. The house was quiet once more, but the stillness no longer felt heavy. It was lighter, as if the walls themselves had been breathing out years of grief and carrying in something new, hope. He sat in the dim glow of the living room, the soft flicker of the fireplace, casting gentle shadows that danced like memories. The letter from the visitor, lay folded neatly on the table, a tangible piece of a story that had been waiting to be told. The house was more than just wood and stone. It was a sanctuary for those who carried pain too heavy to carry alone. And now it had welcomed him fully, not just as a keeper, but as a participant in its endless cycle of loss and healing. He thought about the knocking, the quiet summons that had begun this journey. Each time it came, it was a call for attention, a plea to open a door that led somewhere deeper, somewhere hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. The knocking wasn't just a sound, it was a reminder that none of us are truly alone, no matter how empty our rooms feel or how silent our hearts seem. The house held that truth close, weaving it through every shadow and light. He realized that the knocking was not just for the visitors, but for him as well. It was a call to keep listening, keep waiting, and keep believing in the power of stories to heal. The hallway behind the closet door awaited him, glowing softly as if anticipating the next visitor. But tonight it felt different, more like a threshold to something greater than grief. He rose slowly and approached the door, fingers lingering on the cool wood. The photographs on the walls seemed to pulse gently with life, each one a testament to the countless lives that had passed through this space. Faces smiling, crying, loving, and healing, all part of the endless story the house held. He felt a deep connection to each one, a thread tying him to the past, present, and future. As he opened the door and stepped into the corridor, he knew the house would continue to reveal its secrets and stories, but he was no longer afraid. The fear had been replaced by a quiet strength, a promise to be present for whatever came next. He understood now that the house was not a place to escape from pain, but a place to face it, to hold it tenderly, and to transform it into something that could be carried forward. It was a sacred space where the knocking would always be heard, and every visitor, no matter how broken, would find a welcome. Returning to the living room, he sat once more in the worn armchair, the warmth of the fire wrapping around him like a protective embrace. The house hummed quietly, alive with stories and memories that would never truly end. He closed his eyes and let the peace settle over him, a calm born, not from forgetting, but from understanding. The knocking would come again. It always would. And when it did, he would be ready, not just to open a door, but to open a heart. Tonight the house was still, but beneath the quiet, a soft rhythm pulsed, a heartbeat shared between the house, its visitors, and its keeper. It was a rhythm of hope, forgiveness, and love. And in that rhythm, he found a promise he could hold on to, that no one ever truly walks alone. The house was quiet once more, but the stillness no longer felt heavy. It was lighter, as if the walls themselves had been breathing out years of grief and carrying in something new, hope. He sat in the dim glow of the living room, the soft flicker of the fireplace, casting gentle shadows that danced like memories. The letter from the visitor lay folded neatly on the table, a tangible piece of a story that had been waiting to be told. The house was more than just wood and stone. It was a sanctuary for those who carried pain too heavy to carry alone. And now it had welcomed him fully, not just as a keeper, but as a participant in its endless cycle of loss and healing. He thought about the knocking, the quiet summons that had begun this journey. Each time it came, it was a call for attention, a plea to open a door that led somewhere deeper, somewhere hidden beneath the surface of everyday life. The knocking wasn't just a sound, it was a reminder that none of us are truly alone, no matter how empty our rooms feel or how silent our hearts seem. The house held that truth close, weaving it through every shadow and light. He realized that the knocking was not just for the visitors, but for him as well. It was a call to keep listening, keep waiting, and keep believing in the power of stories to heal. The hallway behind the closet door awaited him, glowing softly as if anticipating the next visitor. But tonight it felt different, more like a threshold to something greater than grief. He rose slowly and approached the door, fingers lingering on the cool wood. The photographs on the walls seemed to pulse gently with life, each one a testament to the countless lives that had passed through this space. Faces smiling, crying, loving, and healing, all part of the endless story the house held. He felt a deep connection to each one, a thread tying him to the past, present, and future. As he opened the door and stepped into the corridor, he knew the house would continue to reveal its secrets and stories, but he was no longer afraid. The fear had been replaced by a quiet strength, a promise to be present for whatever came next. He understood now that the house was not a place to escape from pain, but a place to face it, to hold it tenderly, and to transform it into something that could be carried forward. It was a sacred space where the knocking would always be heard, and every visitor, no matter how broken, would find a welcome. Returning to the living room, he sat once more in the worn armchair, the warmth of the fire wrapping around him like a protective embrace. The house hummed quietly, alive with stories and memories that would never truly end. He closed his eyes and let the peace settle over him, a calm born, not from forgetting, but from understanding. The knocking would come again. It always would. And when it did, he would be ready, not just to open a door, but to open a heart. Tonight the house was still, but beneath the quiet, a soft rhythm pulsed, a heartbeat shared between the house, its visitors, and its keeper. It was a rhythm of hope, forgiveness, and love. And in that rhythm, he found a promise he could hold on to, that no one ever truly walks alone. The house settled into a quiet rhythm that night, but the silence carried a weight that felt different, heavier, yet somehow more profound. The knocking had faded, but its echo lingered in the corners of the rooms and in the spaces between heartbeats. He sat alone in the living room, staring into the fire as the flames flickered, like restless spirits dancing in the dark. The room seemed to breathe with him, inhaling the stillness and exhaling memories long buried. This was the silence after the door had been opened, the calm that comes when something inside begins to shift, quietly and irreversibly. He thought about the visitors who had come and gone, each leaving behind a trace, a story etched into the fabric of the house. The stories weren't just memories, they were living threads woven into the walls, the floorboards, the very air. Some were full of pain and loss, others of hope and renewal, but all were bound by a fragile tenderness. The house had taught him that silence was never empty. It was full of things unspoken, feelings unshared, and truths yet to be revealed. In that silence, he could feel the pulse of every story waiting to be told, every knock waiting to come again. Tonight, the quiet was interrupted by a sudden chill, a breath of cold air that stirred the embers of the fire and caused the photographs on the walls to flicker in the dim light. He stood slowly, the weight of anticipation settling deep into his bones. The closet door creaked open, just enough to reveal a narrow sliver of darkness beyond, a doorway waiting to be crossed. This was the threshold of something new, something unknown. He felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the mix of fear and hope that had become part of his journey. The knocking hadn't returned, but the invitation was clear. The house was ready to tell another story. He stepped toward the door, the warmth of the room fading behind him as he entered the hallway. The photographs that lined the walls shifted with a gentle, almost breathing motion, their faces changing into those of strangers. Some smiled, some wept, some reached out silently, as if seeking connection. Among them, he caught sight of a young woman's face, a face marked by quiet strength and a shadow of sorrow. Her eyes met his with an intensity that unsettled and drew him forward. The house had chosen this story for him now. It was hers to tell, but he would be the one to listen. As he followed the hallway deeper into the unknown, the house seemed to pulse with a gentle urgency. The walls hummed with the weight of memories waiting to be shared, and the air grew thick with the scent of rain on earth, fresh, cleansing, and full of promise. He knew that beyond the next door lay a story of heartbreak and healing, loss and forgiveness. And as he prepared to step through, he carried with him the lessons of all who had come before, that pain could be held without breaking, that silence could speak volumes, and that the knocking was never a threat, but an invitation to listen, to understand, and to heal. Chapter 6, Part 2, The Story Behind the Door. The hallway stretched endlessly before him, a corridor not just of wood and plaster, but of whispered memories and untold stories. Every photograph pinned to the walls shimmered subtly in the dim light, faces shifting slowly like waves on a restless sea. Some smiled softly, others carried looks of pain and quiet despair, all bound together by invisible threads of shared history. He moved with careful reverence, each step cushioned by a mix of fear and hope, a strange, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, this journey was leading him to something worth holding on to. The house was no longer just a place where echoes lived. It was a living vessel carrying the soul of every story it ever touched. His eyes were drawn again to the young woman he had glimpsed just moments before. She was still there, framed in one of the photos, but now more vivid in his mind, a stark contrast against the faded black and white around her. Her eyes held a storm of emotions, sadness, strength, regret, and an unyielding spark of resilience. She was a paradox, both broken and whole, a testament to a life that had been stretched thin but never completely torn. It was as if the house itself had chosen her story, entrusted him to be the listener, the witness, the bearer of her truth. He reached out as if to touch the image, longing to bridge the gap between the living and the forgotten, to connect the fragile past with the uncertain present. Then, as if summoned by his silent plea, a door appeared at the end of the hallway, a door weathered by time and loss. Its wood was scratched and faded, the hinges creaking softly, as if reluctant but bound by duty. There was no lock, just a simple latch, hanging slightly loose, as though waiting for someone to finally open it. The house held its breath as he reached forward, his hand trembling as it gripped the cold brass handle. The knocking had long ceased, but the invitation remained. Steeling himself, he pulled the door open and stepped inside. The room beyond was smaller, dimly lit by a single window draped with thin curtains, allowing soft grey light to filter through. It smelled faintly of rain on dry earth, a scent that was both nostalgic and grounding. The walls were lined with shelves heavy with worn books, faded letters tied with ribbon, and photographs carefully arranged like pieces of a fragile puzzle. Each item seemed to pulse with meaning, each a fragment of a life lived fiercely, a love lost, a regret etched into time. It was a sanctuary not just of memories but of raw emotions laid bare, hope, grief, longing and forgiveness mingled in the quiet air. Suddenly, the young woman appeared beside him, not as a ghost or apparition, but as a presence so vivid it took his breath away. Her eyes locked onto his, communicating volumes in silence. There was no fear in her gaze, only a deep yearning to be understood. She was a soul caught between worlds, a story that had not yet found its ending. The house had brought her here to be seen, to be heard, and to finally be free. As he stood with her in the quiet room, he felt the weight of years pressing down, but also the fragile hope that comes with being witnessed. The knocking had never been just about doors or rooms. It was about connection, about the unspoken human need to be held in our pain. Together they explored the room's contents, each photograph and letter telling a chapter of her life. There were birthdays celebrated alone, letters never sent, promises broken by absence and silence. A faded dress hung on a hook, its fabric worn thin but still full of memories of happier days. A cracked locket revealed a tiny photograph inside, an image of a child smiling up with wide eyes full of trust and love. As he touched the locket gently, he felt the room grow heavier with sorrow, the kind that lingers long after tears have dried. Yet beneath the weight was a thread of something stronger, resilience born from love, the quiet strength of someone who had carried her grief with dignity. Her story unfolded silently but powerfully, painting pictures of heartbreak and healing. There was a husband lost too soon, a child taken by illness, and years spent navigating the lonely corridors of grief. He saw the quiet battles fought behind closed doors, the nights filled with unanswered prayers, the days lived in a numb fog of sorrow. But there was also love, fierce and unyielding, that had refused to be extinguished. That love was woven into every object in the room, into every faded photograph and carefully folded letter. The house held her story with tender care, transforming the sharp edges of pain into something softer, something that could be touched without breaking. As they sat together in the fading light, the young woman's eyes reflected a deep sadness, but also a profound relief. She had carried her burden alone for so long, but here in this space, she was no longer invisible. The house had given her a voice, even without words, and in that silence, he felt the power of shared grief and shared healing. It was a moment suspended in time, a fragile piece born of connection. He understood then that the knocking would come again, for every visitor, every story waiting in the shadows. But with each story told, with each heart held, the house grew lighter, more alive, more full of hope. When the light in the room began to dim, and the young woman's presence softened into a gentle glow, he knew it was time to step back into the hallway. The photographs along the walls glimmered softly, as if acknowledging the passage of another story through the house's corridors. He felt the thread of her story woven into his own, a reminder that no grief was ever truly alone, and no silence ever truly empty. As the door closed behind him, he carried with him the quiet strength of a life lived fully, the sorrow of loss, and the enduring promise of healing. The knocking would return, but so would the stories, and he would be here to listen. The corridor seemed to stretch longer than before, the photographs on the walls shifting subtly, as if alive, breathing with quiet stories that had yet to unfold. His footsteps echoed softly, a steady rhythm in the hushed house. Every corner held a whisper, every shadow a secret, waiting patiently for its moment to emerge. He had come to understand that the house was not just a shelter, it was a keeper of moments, a guardian of pain and hope intertwined. The knocking had led him here again, through the door he had opened, into the depths of lives that reached beyond time. Ahead, the hallway curved, narrowing into a tighter passage that seemed to pull him deeper inside. The air grew cooler, heavier, and the light dimmed to a faint glow from unseen sources. The photographs grew older, their edges frayed, the faces more distant yet more haunting. He noticed a young boy among them, his eyes wide with curiosity and something else, fear, maybe, or sadness. The boy's gaze seemed to reach out to him, inviting him to follow, to understand. The house was calling once more, not with the urgency of knocking, but with the subtle insistence of a heartbeat, steady, unyielding. At the end of the passage stood another door, different from the others. It was smaller, simpler, almost hidden behind a faded tapestry that fluttered lightly despite the still air. The latch was old, rusted, but surprisingly unlocked. He reached for the handle, his fingers brushing the cold metal, and pushed the door open with a slow creak. Beyond lay a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness. A faint light flickered at the bottom, a lantern's glow, steady but fragile. The house seemed to hold its breath as he descended, each step measured and quiet, the weight of anticipation pressing gently against his chest. At the base of the stairs he found himself in a small, cavernous room. The walls were rough stone, damp with the scent of earth and history. Along the walls hung faded drawings and scribbled notes, maps of places and people long gone, charts of emotions too complex for words. In the center, a table was strewn with relics, an old compass, a worn diary, a cracked mirror, reflecting his own cautious expression. This was a space of secrets, a hidden chamber where the unspoken parts of stories lived. Fear, regret, shame, and sometimes the faintest glimmer of hope. The house had brought him here, to face what lay beneath the surface. As he explored the room, a presence emerged from the shadows, a figure cloaked in grey, eyes wise and tired, but kind. The figure did not speak, but through a silence that was almost sacred, he felt a deep connection, as if the figure was a guardian of the house's darkest truths. The presence seemed to beckon him to sit, to rest in the space where sorrow and healing intersected. He obeyed, feeling the weight of years lift just enough to breathe. The figure gestured toward the diary, inviting him to open it and read. With trembling hands, he unfolded the fragile pages, stepping deeper into a story carved by time. The diary told of a life marked by loss and isolation, a man who had once been full of dreams, now broken by betrayal and silence. Words spilled onto the pages, like tears, raw and unfiltered, revealing wounds that had never healed. He read of nights spent wandering in darkness, of moments when hope seemed impossible, and of a desperate search for meaning in a world that had turned cold. But intertwined with the pain were glimpses of love. Love for a child, for a friend, for the faint light of possibility. The diary was a testament to resilience, a reminder that even in the deepest shadows, there was a flicker of life waiting to be found. As he closed the diary, the figure in grey reached out, placing a hand over his own, in a gesture of solidarity. No words were needed. The room itself hummed with understanding. He felt the walls around him pulse gently, alive with the stories of those who had come before, and those yet to come. The house was a refuge, a place where broken pieces could be gathered and held, where the knocking was never a summons to fear, but an invitation to heal. Rising slowly, he left the chamber, carrying with him the weight of the story and the light it offered. Ascending the spiral stairs back into the hallway, the photographs along the walls brightened, their faces now familiar and warm. The young boy's eyes held a new softness, a thankfulness that passed between worlds. The house whispered promises of more stories, more moments to hold, and he felt ready to listen, to bear witness, and to open doors still hidden in the shadows. The knocking would return, always, but so would the quiet strength that came from being seen and understood. And in that quiet, he found the courage to keep walking forward, one step at a time. The air shifted as he emerged from the hidden chamber, the corridor once again unfolding before him like an ancient storybook reopening its pages. The photographs that lined the walls glowed softly, faces now etched with newfound warmth and familiarity. Their eyes no longer seemed distant or forlorn. Instead, they shimmered with quiet gratitude, as though the house itself was breathing a sigh of relief. Each story told, each sorrow acknowledged, lightened the weight that hung in the air like a dense fog. He felt a growing sense of purpose, a delicate thread weaving his heart into the fabric of the house's existence. His footsteps echoed down the hall, steady but measured, as if the very floor beneath him was guiding his path. There was a stillness that wasn't silence, a hum of life beneath the surface that promised the journey was far from over. The knocking had softened to a gentle tapping, a rhythmic invitation to look deeper, to understand beyond the surface. Ahead, the closet door waited, familiar yet transformed, no longer just a boundary, but a threshold to truths yet to be uncovered. His fingers brushed the worn wood, tracing the grain that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the house itself. With a steadying breath, he opened the door and stepped through into a room bathed in soft golden light. It was unlike any he had seen before, an open space filled with sunlight that filtered through high windows, dust motes dancing lazily in the warmth. The walls were lined with shelves, each holding a delicate glass jar filled with shimmering lights, tiny sparks trapped and preserved like fireflies in the dark. The jars pulsed softly, casting gentle glows that shifted in color and intensity, creating a living mosaic of hope and memory. The room was a sanctuary, a place where the intangible, the essence of lives, moments, emotions was captured and honored. At the center stood a large, ornate mirror framed in intricate silver filigree. It was both inviting and intimidating, its surface rippling faintly as if alive. He approached slowly, drawn to the reflection that awaited him. But the mirror did not simply show his own face. Instead, it reflected the many versions of himself that had existed. Boy, man, dreamer, broken soul, each layer revealing scars and smiles, losses and victories. The mirror was a reminder that every story he had encountered was also part of his own, interwoven with his experiences, fears, and hopes. It was the final threshold, the moment of reckoning where all the fragments of self and other came together. As he gazed into the mirror, the glass shimmered and shifted, revealing scenes from the lives he had touched through the house. The young woman and her lost child, the man in the diary whose grief was raw and aching, the boy whose wide eyes had called to him from the photographs. He saw their pain, their love, their resilience reflected back at him, merging with his own story in a tapestry of shared humanity. The house had shown him that no one was truly alone, that every knock on the closet door was a plea for connection, a call to remember that we are bound by the stories we carry. Tears welled in his eyes, not just for the lives he had witnessed, but for the healing unfolding within himself. The jars of light pulsed brighter, their soft glow enveloping him in a warm embrace. Each flicker was a life acknowledged, a grief honored, a hope rekindled. The room hummed with quiet power, a symphony of souls united across time and space. The house was no longer just a place of shadows and knocks. It had become a sanctuary of healing, a beacon for those lost in the dark. He understood now that his role was more than listener. It was guardian, storyteller, and witness. The knocking would continue, and with it, the chance to carry stories forward, to hold pain and light side by side. With one last look at the mirror, He turned and stepped back through the door. The hallway welcomed him, the photographs shining like stars lighting his way. The closet door closed gently behind him, no longer a barrier but a promise that stories, no matter how broken or beautiful, would never be forgotten. As he moved forward, the house hummed softly, a lullaby for the weary and the hopeful alike. The knocking was no longer a threat, but an invitation to listen, to remember, and to heal. The house, once heavy with silence and shadow, now breathed with a quiet life of its own. The knocking had become a softer rhythm, a steady heartbeat that invited more than fear. It invited understanding. The man stood at the threshold of this changed space, feeling the weight of everything he had witnessed settle gently in his chest. Each story he had uncovered was a thread woven into the tapestry of the house. And now, new echoes began to stir, whispers of lives yet to be told, of hearts still seeking to be heard. The hallway stretched before him once more, the photographs on the walls shining with renewed clarity. Faces that had once seemed distant now radiated warmth and connection, their eyes meeting his with quiet gratitude. Among them were new images, fresh stories emerging like buds in spring, faces of strangers he did not yet know, lives waiting patiently for their moments to unfold. The house was alive, a living library of human experience, and he was both witness and participant in its unfolding narrative. As he walked slowly, absorbing the soft glow of the photographs, a familiar sound stirred from deep within the walls, the knocking. But this time, it was different. The rhythm was tentative, hesitant, as if the house itself was unsure whether to invite or warn. The sound came from a different closet now, one he had passed many times, but never entered. His heart quickened, not with fear, but with the quiet thrill of discovery. The knocking was no longer just a mystery. It was a call to compassion, a summons to open new doors. He approached the closet door, its paint chipped and worn, the brass handle cool beneath his fingers. Unlike before, the door felt lighter, less foreboding, as though it too had been changed by the stories it had witnessed. Taking a deep breath, he turned the handle and stepped inside. The space beyond was unfamiliar, a room bathed in soft blue light, filled with the scent of rain and earth. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with objects of delicate beauty, feathers, stones, hand-carved figurines, and jars filled with water that shimmered with a strange inner glow. In the center of the room stood a small table, atop which lay a single open book. The pages fluttered gently, as if stirred by an invisible breeze, inviting him to come closer. As he read, the words began to take shape not just in his mind, but around him, the room transforming into a living memory. The story was one of quiet courage and hidden wounds, a woman who had faced loss and loneliness, but had found strength in small moments of grace. Her tale was etched with heartbreak, but also with the fierce determination to keep moving forward, to find light even in the darkest places. The house seemed to hold its breath as he traced the lines of the story, each word resonating with a profound truth about resilience and hope. The knocking had led him here, not by chance, but by design. Each story a piece of a larger whole, each life a note in the symphony of healing. He felt a stirring within himself, a gentle awakening to the power of empathy, to the quiet bravery of those who carry pain yet choose to love. The room pulsed softly with light, the objects on the shelves shimmering as if alive, bearing witness to a life that had refused to be forgotten. As the story unfolded, the woman appeared before him, not as a ghost, but as a presence filled with warmth and sorrow. Her eyes held a depth of experience, a mixture of grief and gratitude that transcended words. Without speaking, she reached out and placed a hand on his heart, a silent gesture of trust and connection. In that moment, he understood that the knocking was never just a sound. It was an invitation to share burdens, to carry the weight of stories with compassion and care. The house was more than walls and doors. It was a sanctuary for souls seeking to be seen. Time seemed to pause as they stood together in the softly glowing room, two lives connected by the fragile threads of memory and hope. He felt the presence of countless others, the man from the diary, the young boy, the woman with the lost child, all weaving together in a tapestry of shared humanity. The knocking would come again, he knew, bringing new stories, new hearts to hold. And he would be here, ready to listen, to bear witness, and to carry their echoes forward into the light. The woman's presence lingered long after the room's soft blue light faded, leaving behind a stillness that felt both heavy and sacred. He stood alone once again, surrounded by the delicate artifacts, the feathers, the stones, the jars shimmering faintly like captured starlight. The air smelled faintly of rain-soaked earth, a scent that seemed to pull memories to the surface, memories he hadn't known he carried within himself. It was as if the house, with all its stories and shadows, was not only revealing the lives of others, but inviting him to confront his own silent grief. Stepping away from the table, he ran his fingers over the cool glass of a jar filled with water. Inside, tiny lights flickered like distant stars, each one a soul held gently, a moment preserved. The weight of so many unspoken words settled in his chest, a reminder of how often pain remains hidden, locked behind doors we refuse to open. The knocking from the closet was more than a sound. It was a call to face the silence inside himself, to recognize the parts of his story he had buried deep out of fear or shame. He moved through the room slowly, touching the objects as if they were pieces of a puzzle. A smooth stone, worn by time and tide, a feather, fragile and light, a carved wooden bird, wings outstretched in flight. Each object seemed to hold a fragment of a life story, triumph and loss, hope and despair, love and regret. The house was a museum of the human soul, a place where broken pieces were gathered not to be hidden, but to be seen, held and healed. He realized that his journey was not just about uncovering others' stories, but about piecing together the scattered fragments of his own heart. The knocking returned, faint at first, then growing steadier. This time, it came not from the closet door behind him, but from deeper within the house, a place he had not yet dared to explore. The sound was insistent, a soft rap that echoed through the walls, calling him forward. He knew the knocking was not a threat. It was a summons to face what had been left untouched, a reminder that healing required courage and the willingness to step into the unknown. The house was inviting him to go further, to open doors he had not yet seen. Gathering his resolve, he left the blue-lit room and followed the knocking through winding corridors and stairways that twisted like the labyrinth of memory itself. The walls seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, the photographs along the hallway shifting and changing as if alive. Faces appeared and disappeared, some filled with sorrow, others with joy, all connected by the invisible thread of shared experience. He felt the house breathing around him, a living presence that held both the weight of the past and the promise of redemption. Finally, he reached a door unlike any other, tall, heavy, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to move in the flickering light. The knocking came directly from behind it, steady and urgent. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle, the cold metal grounding him in the moment. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room beyond was vast and empty, save for a single chair facing away from him, bathed in shadow. Silence enveloped the space, thick and palpable. He approached the chair slowly, heart pounding in his chest. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a stillness that felt both peaceful and heavy, with expectation. As he drew closer, the chair slowly turned, revealing a figure sitting there, a reflection of himself, yet somehow different. The eyes staring back were tired but clear, filled with a mixture of regret and longing. It was the man he had been, and the man he was becoming, a living reminder of the choices made and the pain endured. Words failed him as the figure reached out, a silent invitation to confront the past and embrace the future. In that moment, he understood that the house was not just a place of stories but a mirror of the soul, a sanctuary where brokenness was met with compassion, where the knocking was a call to reconciliation. The figure's presence was a gift, a chance to forgive, to heal, and to move forward. Tears streamed down his face, not just for the past lost, but for the hope that still burned quietly within. The house hummed softly around him, its walls holding the echoes of countless lives woven together by the threads of love and loss. The knocking would come again, and he would be ready, not just as a witness but as a guardian of stories, a keeper of memories, and a bearer of light in the darkness. The journey was far from over, but in the stillness of that room he found a fragile peace, a promise that no story was ever truly lost when it was held with care. The quiet room felt like a breath held in time, fragile, suspended between what was and what could be. He sat across from the shadowed reflection of himself, the figure that carried the weight of every regret, every missed chance, and every whispered apology. The silence between them was heavy, yet it carried an unexpected tenderness, as if the house itself was urging him to lean into the quiet, to listen to the unspoken truths that words could never fully capture. The knocking returned softly, almost as a murmur now weaving through the air like a fragile thread connecting past and present. It was a reminder, a gentle insistence that stories were not static, that every moment held the possibility for healing and change. The figure before him didn't speak, yet its presence was a conversation, an invitation to face the shadows within without fear or judgment. Slowly, he began to understand that the house wasn't just a place for others' stories, but a mirror reflecting his own journey toward acceptance. As he sat there, memories surfaced unbidden, fragments of a life lived with quiet regrets and moments of fleeting joy, faces of loved ones, conversations left unfinished, dreams set aside in the rush of survival. The house had brought him here not to punish, but to heal, to weave together the frayed edges of his own story into something whole and true. The chair creaked softly beneath him, a reminder of the fragility of time and the weight of unspoken words carried through the years. Outside the room, the house seemed to hold its breath, the walls shimmering faintly with the light of countless memories. He felt the presence of those who had come before, the woman who had found strength in small moments, the man whose diary had spoken of loss, the boy whose wide eyes had begged to be seen. Their stories echoed through the halls like whispered prayers, intertwining with his own in a delicate dance of pain and hope. The knocking was a song of connection, a call to remember that no soul walks alone. The figure across from him shifted slightly, the shadowed eyes meeting his with a depth of understanding that transcended time. Without words, it conveyed a forgiveness that was both a balm and a challenge. To forgive himself, to let go of the burdens that had held him captive. The house was no longer a place of fear or mystery, but a sanctuary where brokenness could be met with grace. He reached out tentatively, fingertips brushing the space between them, and felt a warmth spread through his chest, a quiet light igniting the darkness within. Time lost its meaning in that room, where past and present converged in a fragile harmony. The knocking softened further, becoming a gentle heartbeat that resonated with the pulse of the house. He realized then that the journey was not about escaping the shadows, but learning to live with them, to carry them lightly as part of the whole. The house had given him a gift, the chance to rewrite the narrative, to find peace in the stories that had shaped him. As he rose from the chair, the figure smiled, fading into the light like a whispered promise. He stepped out of the room and into the hallway, the photographs on the walls now shining with a radiant glow. Each face told a story of survival and love, loss and redemption, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The knocking came once more, gentle and inviting, a reminder that the house was alive, waiting for the next story to unfold. With a steady heart, he moved forward, ready to listen, to witness, and to carry the light of countless souls into the future. Thank you for joining this journey into the hidden stories behind the knocking in the closet. If you found yourself drawn into the mystery, feeling the weight of the untold lives and the quiet strength within, there's so much more to discover. Subscribe now to dive deeper into fascinating history, untold stories, and chilling mysteries that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Don't miss out. Each video uncovers new secrets and emotional journeys that will stay with you long after the story ends. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more unforgettable stories.